Sweet. Awesome. All right. So are you good to get started?
Yep.
All right. So this I've tricked you. This entire conversation is going to be me calling you an uber racist and making sure you're deplatformed off of every single deplatformed. Well, no, that encompasses it. Everything. All right. So this is going to be an adversarial conversation against two people who hate each other, right?
Yeah.
That's what you
Yeah.
prepped for.
Exactly. We'll pretend that.
Okay, that's what you got the beer and everything. So we'll
Hey, a little role play is good for everyone, right?
okay. So we do vehemently disagree on this topic. I think.
Yes.
Yeah, probably so. But and this is going to be a debate. But like I don't know. I almost want to call it an argument more than a debate. But there's some connotations with argument that I don't know if would be accurate.
Yeah.
All right.
Like a formal debate. Yeah. Did I do all the preparing and so forth that I would for a debate? No. But I like you, so I thought we talk about this all the time. This is going to be way better than Twitter.
Oh God, I'm gonna be honest. Like anytime I see like a conversation in my mentions going on, or not going on for like 3 days, I'm like, it's interesting. I want to keep up with it, but also like the urge to mute the conversation is there. Just keeps going on. Yeah. So Twitter, because Twitter's a horrible. That's why. Hopefully, this will be a much better avenue of ideas. So why don't you go ahead
Critical race theory. I think we were talking on Twitter, like, what do we call this? Like, critical race theory, the end of the world, or not the end?
Well, I went with the boring Twitter title for the YouTube video because I plan to upload this on YouTube as a video in and of itself. But I just went with the standard boring Twitter title of like talking to Brian about critical race theory. So the Twitch title is boring, but we might spice it up for YouTube.
Yeah.
All right, so
sure. I mean, I get pretty fired up about it because when I see it.
Before we get into that, can you just go ahead and introduce to my chats who you are?
Okay, so on Twitch I go by MythCon Brian, but I am Brian Edward. I'm one of the organizers of Better Discourse, Minds IRL, and MythCon. So we've kind of rebranded that the whole time, but it's basically the same thing, bringing people of diverse viewpoints together to talk live on stage.
Okay, and I was at your event 3 weeks ago,
and the year before that,
not quite a full year, but in 2020 I was at the first iteration. Yeah.
So yeah, you are a second generation to be a third generation in the next one.
Awesome, woo, sweet. Depending on how this goes, right? All right, and last important question: what are you drinking?
River West Stein. It's a Wisconsin amber. I don't know if I can show it.
Well, you're showing us the back label.
So.
Oh, I guess
front label's falling off.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So based on the incredibly productive Twitter conversations that we've had, it's just the nature of the platform. It fosters wonderful dialogue, and everyone's great. So I want to let you go first. Can you kind of a pithy outline of what you think critical race theory is? And we're going to talk a tiny bit more broadly in critical theory as a whole, but kind of outline what you think it is and the problems that you see in it, because you've had some harsh words to say on the internets.
So yeah, critical theory, in my opinion. So critical race theory, you're right. It's a subdivision of critical theory. Critical theory it's a worldview that sees kind of in a binary view oppressed and oppressor. And specifically, critical race theory sees racism is not aberrant, but is the normal, everyday, like, course of business. That racism is ubiquitous, that it can be found in almost every interaction from the big to the small every day in America. I mean, to me, that is a theological position. To say that racism is everywhere is pretty wild. And Derek Bell, the founder of like critical race theory, at least as far as critical legal studies and where this evolved, said that racism has never gone away since pre-civil rights, that it's always been present. It's simply changed forms. It's now hidden. White people are better at hiding it. We haven't made any significant progress on it. Like he'll mention, yes, we had the civil rights, but essentially nothing's changed. So to me, that may have been true in 1971. I know even Clarence Thomas said that when he graduated that he could not get a job in a top Atlanta law firm in 1971 as a black man. They just couldn't do it. So Derek Bell probably has a point in 1971 that yes, racism has gone from the overt to more hidden, but to apply that to 2021, this is silly. I don't think you can make that case.
Okay.
And I guess to some of the other parts of it, you have standpoint theory. So it would exist that white people only support things like diversity and critical race theory and all of this only for their own betterment. That they're not doing it, that they're not being less racist because they look back at 1950s. They look at the sit-ins and the counters and the fire hoses and all this stuff and say, God, that was wrong. What if that was me? Rather, they're doing it in their own self-interest. To me, that's straight up racist. To assume that all white people do that, that's the same way that white people generally prejudge black people in the 1950s. So that's my, I'd say in a nutshell, my hit on critical race theory.
Okay. So I'll do the same thing. I'll say what I believe critical race theory to be, and keep in mind that I'm an expert on critical race theory. I know everything there is to know about it. I've read a third of a book. I've seen like 9 articles, which makes me an expert in every single aspect of this. So I just want to make sure that my qualifications are known. So what I think critical race theory is a lens from which to view a specific component of day-to-day life in a wide variety of areas through the lens of race. And so it makes race the most important factor in the same way that my field of study, biomechanics, makes the physical components, the physics of human movement the most important factor in it. So it's the most important in the field of study, but that's not the same thing as saying as this study deems this to be the most important aspect in this being race and critical race theory. It means that that's what they're looking at, but it doesn't mean that they see it as the end all be all only important factor about a person. And I think I have a good grounding on this, considering that they really emphasize intersectionality and tell you to go look at other critical theories like queer theory, feminist theory, Asian and Latino theories, all that stuff, because one person is not defined by a single categorization, and that's where the impetus and the emphasis on intersectionality comes from. I think it's broadly a good thing, and I think a lot of the pushback, and I'm not going to apply any of this to you as a person, but I think a lot of the pushback that we've seen, I'm terrible at streaming. Thank you for following Sherman March. I'm probably going to not acknowledge the followers and all that stuff because, it's not good form for a debate. So I apologize in the future for anybody who is kind enough to do that stuff. Shit, where was I? Oh, I think a lot of the pushback that we're seeing, especially in the past couple of years, stems from based on the literature that I've seen, the studies that I've seen, not from critical race theory, and we'll get into that later, but seems to say that a lot of pushback and a lot of support for Donald Trump in particular, but the conservative movement as a whole, comes from white people with a high degree of salience in their white identity, and they view the advancement of people of color, and to a lesser extent, because these things seem like they're not related, but they kind of are. The advancement of people of color, the advancement of queer identities, as a threat to their own status. So it seems like for them, the bar for anti-white racism is other races achieving advancement, versus the bar for black racism on the other side is you have to be explicit and abject, like horrors inflicted upon a person of color with the explicit intention stated by the person that it's because they're a person of color. So I think that that a lot of the pushback has to do with that, as in like people feel attacked if you're a part of and I'm going to use the word, I'm going to say privileged group. It is easier for individuals within that privileged group to feel attacked because they've never had to think about their own identities, and any sort of attention drawn to that identity feels like an attack on it. And a lot of the weirder. It seems like on its face, like terrible ideas, like for example, like equality under the law. A critical race theory kind of attacks that, but I think there's a lot of historical precedent and even modern precedent for why equality under the law can still be an incredibly racist practice for a number of reasons that hopefully we'll get into. So I don't know if I sum myself up very correctly or well there, but yeah, that's my opening statement in this formal debate. Okay.
It's interesting. One of the things that you mentioned here, that like it's easier to feel like kind of weirded out by your identity, but I don't know if that's true. I mean, Derek Bell says when things started to get integrated by schools and job sites started to integrate, he said that Black people noticed their race more. So I would think that identity could be compromised equally on both sides. And again, I don't know how much white people as a whole hold identity. I know I don't. Like I happen to be white, but I'm not, I don't consider myself white. I mean, I was told like Black Lives Matter. The reason why they put Black first is they want to center the Black identity, right? That the Black identity is very important to them. And I think that that's generally true with Black people, Black Americans. They enjoy that Black identity. I think there's some benefits to that. I think there's definitely drawbacks. I just don't know if a lot of white people do that. The alt-right definitely do. There's definitely some, and there's others that might. But I guess I would identify myself by my personality, my friends, my career, things like that.
Well, I think that that's a benefit enjoyed by people who are in a largely majority identity. So, for example, I don't think a lot of straight people view themselves through that lens. They don't make that a part of their identity just because why would they ever need to? That's just an accepted, quote unquote, normal part of day-to-day living. Whereas queer people, gay people, and trans people, and what have you, since we are in a minority, we are considered a deviation from the norm. We have a lot more salience. We have a lot more like awareness of the differentiation that our identity has within the modern culture, like within like the modern zeitgeist. And so when you say like
blue collar or white collar, right? There's more blue collar workers than white collar workers, right? They're the majority, yet like you might, you can identify. I'm not saying an identity is necessarily good or bad. It has its ups and its downs. But you can identify as blue collar, and then
this had nothing to do with the morality, the good or bad of identities. It just, I think, is a reasonable explanation of why majority identities might not have the same salience of their identity versus minority identities, just because a lot of categorizations, a lot of identities are formed through differentiation rather than made up whole cloth out of nothing. So,
right, but I think blue collar would be an example that doesn't fit that, because there's more blue collar workers than white collar workers, and I wouldn't say that. I'd say they're absolutely aware of the blue versus as much as the white.
Of course, but again, they're only really aware of their blue collar identity when it's juxtaposed to white collar identities. So, I mean,
or they're proud of it. I mean, you could be proud of it. Be like, hey, I'm a working union guy. I'm, in some ways, if you've got a good union contract, you're the freest man in the world.
Oh yeah, I'm not putting any sort of moral weight on identities as a whole. I think they can be enormously beneficial and great and morally good, and I think they can be overdone and be very bad. We're just discussing like the nature of identity. Identity is a form of categorization, and for categorization to work, you need differentiation. I think, if you're a blue collar worker, fuck yeah, dude. I can give you a personal example. So I came from. I know I've told you this story before, but for the benefit of the chat, so I came from a very, very poor background. We were poor to the point where we didn't just live in a trailer; our trailer was repossessed. So, take a step beyond that. And so when I went to first an academic program in high school, and then later when I went to college, I was very often the only person from a rural Eastern Kentucky background in my immediate surroundings, and it never bothered me before because obviously I was like surrounded by people who were literally at the time living in a rural Eastern Kentucky background. But when I was put into a position where a lot of the kids were coming from families that had more money, families that had a much more urban background, and when I say urban, I mean urban relative to me. I know a lot of people would consider like Lexington a town, but to me it was the big city with bright lights. And so the salience of your identity is usually put in a juxtaposition to what other identities that you see. That's all that means. So when you bring out the stories of like at the early days of integration, a lot of like Black people were more aware of their race than they were before. I think that could be a reasonable explanation for at least a lot of the cases. Like now, instead of being surrounded by other black people because you were forced to based on segregation, well, now you're in other white people, or now you're surrounded by white people, and you might be a minority in that. For example, I think it's a lot more reasonable for the only black person in my school of full of white people to be very aware, much more aware of their race than any of us were, because if you're a white person in a sea of other white people, you don't really notice it. But if you're the only black person, or one of only like 4 or 5 black people, which is the case in a lot of like rural areas, you become way more aware of it, and everyone else becomes aware of it too, if only through like human pattern recognition, right?
No, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I guess like how does critical race theory like help identity? Like as far as I'm concerned, the identity, the benefit tends to ground you more. I think that if you have a stronger identity, you're less apt to go nihilistic. You're probably less apt to shoot up a school for no reason. You notice that a lot of these, I haven't seen any black kind of random school shooters. I think that black identity grounds you. There's less suicides. This is true for a Muslim identity or like a Catholic identity, something like that. You don't have any identity at all. You're kind of you're flying around. But at the same time, that identity limits you in that, again, if it's a religious identity, you're going to have to comport to whatever the tropes of that religion are. There is what's called authentically black. And I think that limits a lot of black people in expressing what they might truly say, because you could get kicked out of the club. This is true in LGBT communities too. If you go against the grain, you get booted out. That's why we're seeing like the walkaway movement kind of be the LGBT portion of the right, whereas like the traditional GLADs and other things are the LGBT of the left.
Yeah, I don't want to pull things too far away from CRT since that's the topic, but obviously I'm way more comfortable talking about the LGBT stuff and queer theory. So I can say I would I'm not saying that this is analogous, but I actually think that there's some utility in saying that someone is politically gay. Like if you were a gay person and you were fighting against LGBT liberation in this country or in other countries, or if you as intentionally as a gay person accept and say that this is good and normal, accept a lower bar for human rights, I think that's incredibly damaging, and your identity is a part of that. So for example, like Brandon Strachan, Milo Yiannopoulos. Well, I can't say Milo Yiannopoulos anymore.
You can't say Milo.
No, he's straight now. Well, he's
right.
Okay. We can meme on him. Hopefully, we can both meme on him if need be. But let's take Brandon Straka for the big example. So when someone like Brandon Straka, well, I actually don't know if he's
Strzok. I think it's Strzok.
Straka.
Strzok.
English is dumb.
No, just Strzok.
English is dumb. That's not how. Okay. Yeah. But if someone like him rails against like LGBT identities, it's taken a lot more seriously because he's of that identity. So you can see how identities, for a lot of people who say that identities don't matter, well, all of a sudden now they kind of do. Like Blair White has gone against a lot of trans issues, and there's no way that she would have been taken as seriously if she wasn't also trans. Same thing with Candace Owens. I think inarguably a part of her message that resonates with especially conservatives is that she is black, and she's saying a lot of the standard conservative talking points against BLM, against racial conversations. She's taking the typical conservative side, but because she is black, because she holds this identity, her words are given more weight.
They are, because I mean, if you're a conservative and you are saying certain things, right, and there are literally zero black people or zero prominent black people that are saying the same things, you got to wonder, oh shit, like, am I making sense? The fact that you do see a whatever percentage of black Americans, I don't know what voted for Trump, but 15%,
something like 10 to 15.
Yeah, so like a sixth or seventh. That's a solid minority. Then you think, okay, I'm not crazy. Because if it was 0 or 1% or less, then you got to wonder, okay, maybe you really are out of touch. And I think these people like see the black identity differently. I think that they, Candace Owens has black identity, but she doesn't see it in the same way. She thinks it's kind of like some Muslims will say, well, I can do this. I can have a gay friend and still be a good Muslim. And then there's other kind of hardcore says, no, you can't. And so maybe that's what she's saying is like, yes, I can still be conservative and be black.
Let's say that Candace Owens is 100% genuine in her beliefs, because I know a very common criticism levied at her is that she's grifting, she's just lying for the attention. Let's throw it out the window and let's say that she's being completely sincere in everything she says. I think there is, and I sent you a video. I don't know if you got a chance to watch it. I'm a huge deal YouTuber. You have to watch everything I put out, by the way. But I put out a video that I'm very proud of on system justification theory, and it ties into a lot of what we're talking about today. But what I thought was really, really interesting is that a lot of people from minority groups, or specifically, I may or might not like this word, but oppressed groups, like gay people, trans people, black people, there's a certain contingent of them that are actually more likely to say that things like racism don't exist, or homophobia doesn't exist, or discrimination isn't a thing, because there's a personal palliative effect of believing that. Like, if you let's exist in a society where 100% scientifically objective fact that racism was a thing, that if you were black, there is, like, pretend that racism was absolutely a thing, you were going to have a harder time in life because you were black. Like, there's a ton of barriers. Well, if you personally believe that no such barriers exist, that could make you personally feel better, because now you're in an environment where there are no barriers to your success. So there's a palliative effect for believing that. I'm not saying that it's grifting. I'm saying that there is a reasonable reason. Is that
Yeah.
redundant? But
Yes, I mean that would be like the cancer telling themselves that they're not that sick.
Similar to that. And just like with anything else, like, that's not just, like, feelings are biological. Does that make sense? Like, believing certain things actually does have physiological effects in terms of, like, your health and well-being. It's not just, feelings aren't, ethereal. They have, physical manifestations in our body.
Sure, right. Yeah, you could say, your belief in God could be so strong that even though you're facing impossible odds, you can feel calm because God will get me through it.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that
would be one.
Yeah, there's, like, scientific evidence to say that if that could activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which could increase recovery and your ability to respond to cancer treatments.
That's what Candace is saying. I think Candace is saying, yes, racism does exist, but the extent that it exists does not hamper her, in all the important areas of her life, like finding a job, being able to go to stores and get what she needs. Like, would she get a comment here and there? Yeah, I'm sure she does. But she says that's not limiting to her.
Oh yeah, well, I think that points to a problem in this. I mean, I don't have to tell you or anyone else that an anecdote doesn't prove a larger trend, but it does highlight a very difficult part of these conversations, in that when we talk about broad trends, people can't help see themselves within them. And so, like, when we talk about racism as a broad concept, it doesn't apply to every single black person. In fact, any sort of broad analysis of statistics is never going to apply to an individual, because no individual is typical. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah. So the average person is like 1 in a million. Like, if you found someone who was just average in every single category, that person is like 1 in a billion, probably, actually. So it's hard to, like, apply these, like, broader societal theories and these broader societal analyses to an individual person. I guess that brings us to, like, what do you believe constitutes the bar for something, for an action, not a person? What is the bar for what you would consider an action that is racist?
Let's see. I mean, one that's motivated out of racial prejudice. So, somebody that's calling somebody a racial slur, somebody that looks down upon a person and is prejudging them. So they would, I don't know, come up to the counter and you expect them not to have any money. Somebody approaches you and you expect there to do you harm instead of ask for directions to the gas station.
So, see, I would consider that a very, very high bar for racism, and I think that's where a lot of, like, critical race theory comes into conflict with what a lot of people, especially a lot of conservatives, view as what it's talking about.
I guess something else. I mean, if you would think, well, black person in my office might screw up the racial working environment because we've all been. That would be one.
How about this one? Okay,
also a high bar.
Oh, well, if a black person comes into the environment and screws with the work, yeah, that's still, in my opinion, the high bar. How about a low bar? How about you meet an Asian person and you assume that they are more likely to know more about anime than you?
Okay, that's a again, that's it's weird. I wouldn't think that, but yeah, that's a stereotyping. So I guess I would call it differently than racism. So if I say, um, is you an average black person, did they have a black identity? Well, I mean, the large chances, yes, they probably do. That's less so with maybe a white person who doesn't. That's a stereotype. I wouldn't say it's racist because racist implies all kinds of it has all kinds of negative connotations. That stereotype has a slightly negative connotation, and that's what I would give it.
I think that's so. There's a part in White Fragility, that wonderful book that everyone loves, where I actually think no, I think a lot of that book was poorly argued. I think its target audience was people who basically already agreed. There's a part in it that I really, really liked that talked about how like there's this good bad binary, and this sort of is based in critical race theory, where race, if you are racism, always bad, diagnostic of a person, a sign that they're a bad person, and not racist is good. But I actually like drawing that back a little bit, that we are products of our environment. If we act like, for example, I wouldn't be able to morally condemn a white person in the like 1800s for being racist, because we are products of our environment. You can only act upon the societal stimuli that you've been given. So I don't think it would be fair to individually morally condemn that person as evil just because we are products of our environment. And that's why I think it's really important. Like a lot of what CRT and what D'Angelo would call racist are not explicit acts of evil or malice, but assumptions that are baked into our psyche, not based on any like preconceived hatred, but based on just past experiences, pattern recognition, and the things that have been, I don't want to say fed to us by society, because that applies some malicious intent as well. But like little, like small stuff. I've been talking for a while, but
Yeah, no. So yes and no. So obviously, I would judge somebody in the 1800s differently than in 2021, right? But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to hold them to a moral standard. And there were people back then getting above that. Like, for example, in 1890 in Michigan, you were seeing black people elected to city office in and around Detroit with a 95% white electorate. I mean, how is that happening? How's that happening in
I think a really
19th century Michigan?
Yeah, I think a really
Because
good
some
example
people
is
are
like Abraham
not
Lincoln.
doing that.
Like Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, by today's standards, is a racist. He would be considered an abhorrent person because of his extreme racially prejudiced views. But at the time, he was way more progressive than probably the average person. So, I don't want to.
You have to judge those things in accordance. So I guess I disagree a little bit with that society makes you who you are, because that takes away all of our agency.
I don't think so. I think who you are is a mix.
I always almost say that like you're determined by your IQ or something. I don't like this taking away our agency.
Well, it's not taking away your agency, because we are biologically social. The language that you speak is dictated by the environment you grew up in. The ideas that are in your head are only based on the external stimuli that you've been subjected to. Like everything you've seen, like imagine a new color is like the traditional example. So you're only able to take things that you've experienced, things that have happened to you, and reallocate them and reorganize them for new ideas. And all that stuff is going to be, to a certain extent, limiting. When I say environment, I'm not just talking about like TV shows. I'm talking about every single thing that you've ever done in your entire life. So this doesn't limit agency. It just contextualizes like what is the scope of thinking that you are realistically able to have.
I guess, but then it's all the blame on quote unquote the system, right? I mean, with critical race theory, you can actually have a quote unquote system that's racist with zero individual racist people. So let's say that we actually cured racism. That critical race theory wouldn't change. It would still say the system is racist.
This is actually probably the best argument for systemic racism is that it doesn't require any individual within that system to act in malice.
That's ridiculous. So you're saying that if everybody was at zero racism, we could still have a racist system. That's ridiculous.
Because linear time exists, right?
Okay.
So, if there is a system that harmed a specific group of people for for a very, very long period of time, and then uh, let's say like magically, snap of a finger, after the civil rights movement, no person in the United States held any racial prejudice whatsoever. We still have an entire group of people that can be reliably categorized based on arbitrary characteristics who did not have, who couldn't have built wealth, who were in poorer districts, who did not have access to the same educational system. Like we would still see racialized outcomes even after this magical society completely cured every individual of racism. That's what systemic racism is looking at. And
See, you would say that, but what extent do you place that on the system, and what extent do you place on individuals? How did W.E.B. Du Bois and how did Booker T. Washington come up to be top black intellectuals that they just came out of slavery?
this can't be
I mean,
this can't be the bar that we said, because that is like, if somebody makes it out, it can't be racist.
Well, yeah, but Thomas Sowell's book,
In fact, that actually almost goes against your point, right?
Black rednecks, white liberals. I mean, it talks about the social justice warriors of the day, which were like the women from New England, came down because they felt like they had this special obligation to educate the newly freed slaves. So when they do that, though, they're holding, these are religious people, and they're holding the black slaves that are now in their classroom to kind of these Puritan standards, that there's no goofing around. They're treating them like they would their pupils up there. And the ones that actually do listen, stay in class, get taught, they become the intellectual class, but everybody else is goofing off, they get kicked out. So at what point do you have some agency, even back then, when I'm not saying that they weren't facing incredible racism, they were, but at some point there's always agency. And it seems like critical race theory never takes into account that agency. Like you could take it in the examples of people being arrested. Okay, what agency do you have to not resist arrest? I don't think half of these shootings would happen if people weren't resisting arrest.
We also see that people, when I say people are products of our environment, it also means like, yeah, everybody, we have to like act as though free will is a thing. But if you put people in the worst circumstances possible, you can't reliably expect individuals within that to be purely to have the same rational expectations and the same relationship to the system as someone who grew up in better circumstances. So antagonism towards the police might result from a long history, from a culture that has been brutally subjugated by the police. And so
maybe, but you're seeing that same thing with well-to-do Black Americans are resisting arrest at a greater rate. I think it's because there's this Black ethos, and Glenn Lowry or McWhorter calls it the badass motherfucker syndrome. And he's saying that, and I asked this on stage at Better Discourse to Nico. I'm like, does the the experience or the identity have a badass motherfucker problem? He said, yeah. You just sit there and take it. You're not going to be some namby-pamby white boy. To be a Black person, authentically Black in America, means you take no shit. I mean, that's going to get you in trouble.
We also see something really similar to that with very, very poor rural white people. Like your toughness. Yes. If you have been robbed of a lot of agency, if your options for success are severely limited because of your economic and educational circumstances, and economic circumstances, if there are no jobs in your area, poor education in your area, very few opportunities to advance, how are you going to reclaim some sense of agency in your world? You're probably going to do, if you have any sort of like physical agency at all, physicality might be the best option for you to reclaim some sense of that agency. That is enormously psychologically important for a lot of people. And so this is completely divorced from race in this aspect. But if we think about like what racial groups in America have been routinely subjugated to these conditions, where they're going to grow up in environments where education is poor, economic opportunities are very limited, they're more likely to be born to parents who are robbed of economic opportunities, which is going to perpetuate poverty and perpetuate that lack of accumulation of wealth. It kind of makes sense. So there's the why tree that always goes down. Like, well, why are Black people more likely to commit crimes? Okay, because they're of the culture. Well, why do they have this certain culture? And you just go down to why, and either you get to genetics or you get to historical circumstances.
It's not genetics, right? There's a zero chance that it's genetics.
Yeah, agreed. Awesome. Yeah.
But I do think that it's culture, but I don't even like to call it black culture, because I mean Thomas Sowell points out that this is imported from the Badlands of England in 18th century. So the people that are moving to the south from like the northern parts of England and parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland are being actually turned away from Boston, right? They like these people show up and they turn them down. So they land in North Carolina or South Carolina, and they have these bad habits, rough and tumble fighting. Even the burning cross comes from this. But these people are it's high religion, honor culture. It's hardcore, and I think what happens is the black people living in the South have adopted that from the hillbilly whites. So actually, it's not, this ghetto culture isn't ultimately black. That's why I just don't think that to be an authentic black person, like you're actually like mimicking an English people.
Well, that could be a component, but do you think that maybe the subjugation fueled that component? Like if life is hard, you kind of have to be hard to come up against it, right? So you think that the historical subjugation could have like accelerated some propensities, like of poor people? Like, do you think that it could play a part?
Yeah, it could have. You know, but unless you ditch that, I'm sure that's a component. But I think the largest component is some of the behaviors. You know, like I mean, I get it. Like police reform, we're talking about. Okay, maybe the cops need better training, so on and so forth. Okay, yeah, a good argument can be made for that. But why are, when we talk about this, is nobody getting up saying, why is nobody saying, I got a weird message on my thing. Why is nobody saying, along with this, don't resist arrest? Where's Barack Obama saying, hey guys, yeah, we're going to do something, but don't resist arrest? Instead, he's just saying, no, we need to rethink policing from the ground up.
Because, well, one, it's
there. I mean, do we think that it's a good idea to tell people that, or to tell police that they need to preserve everybody despite maximum resistance? I mean, you're going to get people killed. This is like going into the OR and say, kind of sterilize things.
See, this to me takes all agency away from the police. Like the police are just this natural force that is just going to do what they do, and everything is up to the public. Like, no, I hold police to a higher standard than the public,
can't put
right?
It all. But along with,
well, no, it's not that you can't put it all. It's that the vast majority of what happens in a police stop is the responsibility of the police. Like putting them on equal footing is, to me, ridiculous. The police are trained for these instances. If they fail to de-escalate a tense situation, that's on them. That is their fault. And if they kill somebody who is resisting arrest, we don't deem resisting arrest to be a crime punishable by, like, capital punishment. Like, so that's not acceptable.
Statistics, and it said that more people are shot by the police if they're resisting than if they're not.
I would absolutely believe it, yeah.
Yeah, right. And then I didn't tell you, and then I said, well, the racial makeup is mostly white.
Well, that would
Do you think that there's racism against white Americans?
Well, hold on. That's like absolute statistics. Of course, if it was...
No, I'm making up statistics. I'm making them.
Okay, but then...
So I'm saying if I gave you a data set like that, like, the thing is, it's resisting arrest. Like, if we're... I would bet those are highly correlative. So as we work on certain police reforms, which I think that you can, I think body cams, and there's a lot of better training. I'm all for that. But like, can't we also pitch that we ought not resist arrest? I mean, I think that if that component message was going together, a lot of my criticisms of this police thing.
Well, if you want to, and this is where, like, I don't like just saying individuals should act better. That's never a good solution for anything. Because, well, obviously, if individuals just act better, all problems in the world would be fixed. But that's not how we address policy. That's not how we address societal issues. So if there is a reason why people are resisting arrest, why is that? Why? Because obviously, like, the reason you don't resist arrest is because, if the arrest is illegitimate, well, then you can fight it in court. But the question is,
you don't want to die.
Well, also that, but also, like, even if it was just about not dying, if you were unjustly arrested, if you were put through a lot of if they were rough on you, if they did take you out of your day, put you in handcuffs, take you to the station, and then said, "Oh, never mind, that wasn't sorry, we thought you were someone else," and there's no legal recourse for that, what faith would you have in the system? Like, if the reason people resist arrest, or at least a component of it, is people don't trust the police officers, and people of certain communities have more reason not to trust the police officers based on historical circumstances and indeed current data. So the issue here is we could tell individuals to act better, or we could address why this distrust of the system is there in the first place. What relationships have been built over the years that may have fostered this attitude?
There's no doubt. I agree with you that there's distrust of the system. There's no doubt about that. The question is, where's it coming from? I mean, a black person is more likely statistically to be killed by their black neighbor than they are the police.
Well, yeah, but one of them is potentially is a criminal by definition, and the other one is an authority that's supposed to help you. So we shouldn't put those on equal weight either.
Well, it is as far as like a tragedy, but if you're truly worried about your life, like if I'm worried about whether I get killed, obviously there's a difference between I die in a car crash and I'm beheaded by ISIS, right? One is worse than the other, wouldn't you say? Like one is kind of outrageous, the other is kind of a sad act.
Yeah, so societally, yeah.
I get what your point is, but if I'm fearing death, I'm actually much more likely to get to a car wreck than ISIS.
Well, this is why. Sorry, go ahead.
But my point is, do I have an irrational fear? Like if I was going around every day thinking, oh my God, ISIS is going to behead me, ISIS is going to behead me, yet I'm driving to work, no problem, I'm not fearing it. Like, don't you think my fears are out of whack?
Yeah, probably. If you were in like Nebraska or something, terrified of ISIS, probably, yeah.
Yeah, sure, right. I think anywhere in America, like right now, I don't think terrorism is
Nebraska is the most American state. It's right in the middle.
Okay. Yeah, maybe. But I mean, maybe, I don't know, it might be when you were in France, like all those spate of attacks keep happening, maybe. And, so, then maybe your fears are justified there. But I think that's exactly what's happening right now is even then, like, I don't know what the chance of dying in France back when they had like 3 terror attacks within like 3 months, big ones. The chance of getting killed there was probably still
infinitesimally small, right?
Right. It's still small. I think that what's happening is the wide publicization in the media of police killings, of Jacob Blake, Tamir Rice.
Wait, Jacob Blake's still alive, right?
Well, he was shot though. He was, yeah, you're right. Shooting, not killing. Ahmed Arbery, Dante Wright, keep going. These all get pushed up by the media, so I can see why some people some Black Americans might think, "Holy crap, this is happening all the time." But I think that one's on the media.
Well, that works. That the media works in 2 directions. Yeah, well, the media works in 2 directions, right? Like this was the subject of my panel. People also have a very, very distorted view of how violent BLM protests are. They are not violent statistically. The vast, vast, vast majority of them are peaceful. Like that statistic of 93% were peaceful. Even that doesn't paint a full picture, because of the ones that were deemed not peaceful, those individual protests were mostly peaceful. But then there was one action that included setting tires on fire that would deem it violent. And so the media works in both directions there. And I wish I had gotten a chance to talk more about the protest paradigm and how the media is. I don't think it's malicious. They do shape how we view things, and I do like that statistic. This is how for any conservatives who followed in here, this is how you know someone's being good faith. There was a statistic that Carrie brought up during our discussion that said that, excuse me, it was, I think, Black Americans, but definitely liberal white Americans who thought that you were more likely to, as a Black man, to die at the hand of a police than you were in a car accident.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I take that at face value. I haven't looked at that statistic, but that seems like it's reasonable to me, and I'm willing to believe it unless unproven otherwise. All right. That's what good faith is. But at the same time, these things are believed true by these people, and they are mistakes, but there is certain precedent behind it that would give it a lot of legitimacy. So you don't have to get, so systemic racism is not just about the criminal justice system. Well, actually, it's not just about police killings. Like the ones that get the most attention-grabbing headlines are the killings of unarmed Black people. And even if we just focused there, I think there's something to be gained from it, because how many people immediately started justifying the killing of, George Floyd, I think, unified people for about 20 seconds, would you say? For the first 20 seconds after the video Yeah.
I'd say a few days, but sure.
Yeah, 20 seconds is hyperbole, but yeah, for a few days people were
Police
unified.
brutality, though, there's still no evidence that it was racism. But go.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about like that bar. But it seemed everyone's unified. Yeah, definitely that was a case of police brutality. But then as the days and months went on, now all of a sudden you started to see people divide again because a lot of people, instead of just saying, well, no, it wasn't racism, that wasn't good enough for a lot of conservatives. That was what they had to do was prove that actually George Floyd died of an overdose, despite no evidence pointing to that. And they started to fabricate stories that actually the police actions there did not cause his death. Like, to me, that is like
it's a judgment call.
It's not a judgment call.
If you had, let's say nobody films it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he's found in the thing, in his house, right? Maybe somebody kneeled in his neck, maybe they didn't, right? The whole thing was not filmed, took place in private. They found the dead body. They would have done the drug test, and they would have said, yeah, died of fentanyl overdose, because there wasn't going to be any marks, and there wouldn't have been any real evidence of major trauma to the neck.
Yeah, well, this worries me because if you had less evidence, you would have come to a different conclusion. To me, is not a compelling argument.
Well, so what you're saying is you have two ways that you could have died. Like, so he had excited delirium almost for sure. You can die from that. Now, did the knee put extra strain on him? Probably. How much? Is that a contributing factor to the death? Probably.
Well, it wasn't. Well, yeah, probably isn't almost
much?
Definitely. Well, isn't almost definitely. Let's say that he would have died from an overdose 10 minutes after that encounter happened. Okay, let's say that. Okay, let's say that would have happened. The police officer still killed him. It was still murder.
I mean, it's just murder. I don't know. So it could be reckless endangerment. I mean, when I saw it the first time, I mean, yeah, I was like, look, you're on his neck now. What was weird, he's screaming for mom. I'm like, it's terrible to watch.
It is, and like, and two autopsies. One I think was independent, and one was done by the, I can't remember who did the second one. I just know, I think it was a government agency. Neither one found an overdose as the cause of death, and so like none of the evidence pointed towards an overdose.
Well, the agencies, they had to rewrite the autopsy. Like, it's weird, and you can get doctors like, and ask any med mal lawyer this. You can get a doctor to say anything. So
you can get a doctor to say anything, but that's not
about.
You can get a doctor to say anything, but that's not a good. Like, you can get anybody to say anything, but if you could use that as an argument against literally anything.
But I'm saying, what if you did have that in your system? Like, that is, it's a mitigating factor, or it's a complicating factor. Well, I think the mitigating factor is the fact that George Floyd was saying that he couldn't breathe even before he was received.
That
he's like, he doesn't know.
This has nothing to do with you. This is something that I see a lot. Like, if you can talk, that means you can breathe. That is stupid. That is very stupid. No one should say that. All right. The way breathing works, it is done by skeletal muscles. Your diaphragm, your external intercostals pull down on your lungs and pull out on your lungs. All right. These are skeletal muscles that are not meant to go against force. All right. So if your breathing is being constricted, let's say you had a belt around your chest or someone was kneeling on you, just because you can take in breaths, those muscles get tired and they are not built up to the point where they can.
That's why I freaked out when I saw them jump on the guy selling Lucy's, what was his name, in New York?
Gardner?
And they were all, Eric Gardner. Yeah. And I'm like, you shouldn't do that. I was watching with my girlfriend who's a PA, and she's like, oh my God. It was like, get off of him. Like, we're both, right away, we both knew that this is going to create a problem. Like, that was just not, like, that wouldn't happen in the hospital. And neither would the George Floyd thing. But him saying he couldn't breathe, prior to that, you might start ignoring the I can't breathe.
If you were, one, ignorant on respiratory physiology, and two, motivated to find a justification for the murder. To me, those are the two most salient factors that would lead you to believe that.
No, I mean, like, him ignoring that. Like, if I'm crying wolf, though, if I'm saying, something to you all the time, right? Like, it hurts, and that's my thing, and then now I'm actually hurt. You would ignore that. I'm not justifying what he did. I'm just saying that is a mitigating factor to the I can't breathe part.
So
Because he
I'm
was saying that was he was standing up.
well. So panic can set in, and that can affect someone's ability to breathe. So hyperventilation, for example, can affect like your perception of how well you're breathing because you're getting rid of more CO2, therefore you're making your blood more alkaline. It feels like you're suffocating.
And your blood vessels are constricting.
Yeah, the sympathetic nervous system makes your blood vessels constrict, which indirectly makes you feel like you're suffocating. Yeah, so there are a lot of physiological factors that go into it. It's not just if there's any air that can get into your body, then that means you're not suffocating. Anyway, so I forgot what brought us here. I think what brought us here was the fact that a lot of people people want, with good reason, all right, and this is not malicious at all, people want to think that police officers are good. I don't think that's malicious. I don't think that's a sign of white supremacy. I think it's a sign of if society were functioning the way it should be functioning, police officers' actions would be almost universally good.
We want to think doctors are good. We want to think, university professors.
Yeah, and I do not see it as a sign of abject, overt white supremacy for someone to side with police officers out of instinct. All right, but I do think, and this is where our bar for like we'll talk about like equality under the law too. I think that even though that might not be explicitly racist intent, it could result in racist outcomes. Like, so, for example, if you have a population who is disproportionately policed, and you could say whether it's crime or not, although there's quite a bit of research to say that race is a factor in it, with every other variable to compared for. The historical circumstances that put these individuals in these situations were objectively racist, and unless we address those historical circumstances and work to fix them, then there's still going to be these disproportionate, unequitable outcomes.
What's fixing though? Like what's an endpoint? I'm never told what an endpoint is.
To me,
when can critical race theory end? When is it no longer needed?
Well, as a lens, I think it's always needed. But that's my definition though, as a lens.
Okay, but what if black people own 75% of everything?
Well, then critical race theory works, and still you're looking at race as a primary factor.
It works in reverse, and whites get to do it.
Sure, if that were to happen, if material circumstances were to change, and it's and race is a factor that could be looked at, absolutely. Okay, that's all I view critical race theory as.
Okay, but why are we measuring everything by materialist outcomes? Do you think we're discriminating against the Amish because their incomes are considerably lower?
Well, no, because a lot of that is like deemed as personal choices and cultural.
It is personal choices, right? And so who's to say that they aren't happier than we are? I don't know how to judge that.
Well, you've seen they shave their mustaches. There's no way they're happy. They have to get rid of their mustaches. They're lovely people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying that this as a gauge it seems awfully materialist to me to gauge happiness that way. There's got to be some other statistic to do it. I guess that's my
blood test.
Thing is
happiness blood test.
Yeah, there's some. I know we need some tests. I just don't know. I'm never told like when this is done. The other thing is, while I'm certain that there are people that support critical race theory that for good reasons. I believe that you're one of them. If you support critical race theory,
I do.
You're everything, yeah. But I believe that there are those that support it, and some of those that are near the top of it that they don't want any kind of equity. They want a reversal of oppression. So
I need to go pee, but the last thing I'll say, and then I actually invite you to talk to chat. Can you see chat? Do you have that up anywhere?
Yeah. I could pull it up on my phone, maybe.
There you go. So
in Twitch.
What I'll say is that I've seen a lot of research to say that white people, by and large, and some of it is due to racial salience, like they identify with being white more and more. But some of it is just due to like system justification theory. They're used to a certain way of life and they don't want it changed. Will view any sort of progress that favors a certain group of people that they do not belong to as an oppression on them. An example would be people thought that traditional marriage was being threatened by the introduction of gay marriage. That's the best example that I can come up with. Right. And that's where I will pause with my responses and go pee. Okay.
Which pulled up, and I think I should be able to see the chat.
All right. So I think the question I left you on was how a lot of people in like for lack of a better word, who are in the top of the hierarchy in whatever identity that we're talking about, seem to view any sort of advancement of lower hierarchies as a zero-sum game. And there's a lot of scientific, not just critical race theory, but a lot of like evidence to support this.
But I would think it's the other way around. I would think it's the lowest people in the hierarchy that might think that. Like the people that are doing well, like high-end professionals that I know do not like worry about minority advancement.
It's the opposite.
They're fine. Yeah.
So, for example, like
it's people at the bottom end that are freaked out about this stuff, probably because they're not that intelligent or they have a ton of bad habits and they're using this as an excuse to cover them.
Okay, so based on the research that I've done, it says that a lot of, for example, when you tell people that white people are likely to become the ethnic minority, or in terms of at least not the majority anymore, we're going to lose our majority status by I think 2060 or something. There's a very high percentage of white people, not all, but a very high percentage, who views that as a threat, as they're going to start being subjugated. They're going to start to lose a lot of like rights, that they're going to be less well off than they are now on the basis of not being the majority anymore. And if the same question posed to people who are in minority racial statuses and minority ethnic statuses don't see it as that way. So it seems to be that on aggregate, again, you can't apply this to any individual, but on aggregate, white people tend to view racial relations in the United States as a zero-sum game, and on aggregate, people who are not non-white people don't tend to see it that way.
But if we worded the question this way, I think the perception in that question of that white people are going to lose a majority comes with I think, perceived idea that America itself is going to change. But if you said the racial ethnic, would you be upset or would you be concerned if the racial ethnic, demographics change in such that white people are a minority, but you still knew that these different demographics still had the same American spirit, or that they had adopted the values of quote unquote what America is.
Well, see, that's yeah. If that did change it,
would be a lot better.
It would be. To me, it'd be worse. See, if you qualified it like that, why would you need to qualify it? If you view non-white people in the United States as already having the same values as you, what difference would it make?
Perception. It's the same way with the police, right? Again, you might fear the police unfairly because you have this bad perception of them because of who knows what. Maybe your neighbor was killed by the police. Maybe you saw all this crazy stuff in the media. Perceptions often a reality. Certainly we say this in sales, that's what it is. So if you perceive that this means some other culture's coming in that's foreign to you, so if you said that, then it's no big deal, because racial makeup is whatever, but culture is something significant. If you said, look, all these people are going to come in America and change the culture, I think you'd have a lot of Black Americans saying that's bullshit.
Well, so I definitely agree with you that perception is more or less everything. I don't know if that's exactly what you said, but I would agree with the statement that perception
is reality.
Yeah. I would actually agree with that in more ways than one. Like, perception is reality. But I don't know if I don't know if you can say, well, if white people perceive that becoming a minority ethnic group, a minority racial group by a certain year would mean that the country is going to change for the worse. I don't know if you can then say, well, to me, that's pretty good evidence that the majority are at least a little bit racist, right?
Well, if again, with my qualifier, right, then if people are answering no to that question, then you're going to get more agreement.
See, to me,
that implies certainly some racism. Somebody in the comments says, like, doesn't he imply that people coming over don't have the American spirit, or that people that aren't white? No, I'm just saying that a lot of cultures come over. I mean, Europeans could come over and not have the American spirit.
But they didn't talk about that. They just said the racial makeup.
I know.
It's kind of like, to me, that's
perception is, what's the racial makeup like? But what is the perception? Is the perception a Saudi Arabian coming over, or is it a Mexican?
See, to me, that
one of the biggest reasons why we're not having as much problem with our immigration that Europe is is when we share so much with Mexico. We share a religion for the most part. There's a lot of cultural blend between Central America and North America. There is not near as much blend between Iraq and France.
See, to me, this is almost like introducing a qualifier that, like, would you be okay with your daughter dating a black guy? No. Well, what if the black guy was a doctor with no criminal record? Oh, then I guess that's fine.
No,
well, then no, that guys can't be racist, right?
No, if you said, would you be upset that your daughter was dating a black medical student? And that guy said, yeah, okay, you're probably looking at a racist.
Yeah, but the qualifier that you introduced was you asked two different questions, and one of them was indicative of being a racist. If the guy had said, well, are you okay with your daughter dating a black guy? If he had said no, but then you introduced the qualifier that, well, no, he's a medical student, and he said, oh, then that's fine. That guy's still a racist.
Right, but you could say, Brian, do you like spicy food? And I say no, and then you perceive I don't like Asian food. And I'm like, no, I love Asian food, I just don't like the spicy.
See, part of racism is applying certain characteristics to that group. It's not just like...
Yeah, but we're doing the same thing with food. We've applied spicy to Asian food. When what I don't like is spicy because it's too hot for me, but I do like Asian food. You see what I'm saying? And the perception that Asian food is hot is getting dragged along with this.
All right,
and that's what's happening.
It kind of brings it back to, like, so those studies done on, like, racial names, the employment studies. One of the arguments I hear brought up a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, you brought this argument up as well. It's not that people were associating the names, like, and it wasn't just Jamal and Lakeisha. All right, those were the two, like, front runner names as in terms of what they put on the study, but there was a wide variety of names. It wasn't that they were perceiving those names as black; it's that they were perceiving them as poor, and actually, class was the reason they were being discriminated against. To me, that doesn't make the argument at all, because you're associating black names with poor names.
No, so here's the story of this I was told from one of my black girlfriends I talk about race with all the time. And we love, she's great. She goes, Brian, she goes, there's a difference. She goes, I understand this even in black subculture. And she told me, she goes, so this kid, this girl, she goes, she had a baby, and she had a baby boy, and she named him Lamangelo. And he goes, you know where she got that, Brian?
A Carlos Mazza?
No, she got like lemon jello and put it together. And
that's a Carlos Mencia joke.
Okay, so but this is okay. She's pointing this out to me, and she goes, who the fuck names their kid Lamangelo? She goes, there are people naming their kids weird names because they think it's cool, that are setting them back. She goes, you should never do that. She goes, and I don't like to associate with black people who do.
Hold on, there are two things in that. One, that's a Carlos Mencia joke.
Okay,
which means it's probably someone else's joke, not Carlos Mencia's, because he's a joke stealer. But also, this is actually a really, really good point. What makes a weird name? Who decides what is a weird name? Why isn't Lemon Jello? Let's take away the accent. Why is calling your kid Lemon Jello considered weird? Who decides what's normal?
Weird.
Who decides what's normal?
Why don't you name your daughter Parsley? It's a little weird.
It's weird, but again, where does that weirdness come from? And this is what I love to talk about, because you don't have to. People have norms. People have a status quo that they're familiar with, and you don't have to have any sort of malicious intent towards things outside that norm to want to value what you consider normal. Like, I'm American. I grew up in America in my entire life. I went to Canada once, which is basically America too. But I went to the Quebec part of Canada, and it was weird enough to make me uncomfortable. It doesn't mean I hate Quebec, although you should hate all French people. That's a joke.
Okay, so yeah, so
I can say that.
But what I'm saying is, you can't say it's racism when so is it racist for her to say, okay, and again, this may not have been a real story here. She's probably taking the joke for expression, but she did. What her point was, why the fuck would you name your kid something? You're going to hurt them. That's stupid. And she suggested, that's lower class people that do that. I don't want to associate with them.
Oh, well, that's all right. So this gets into
that's what that was her words, and obviously she can't be nailed on racist there. But
hold on, I wouldn't associate anything with that. But here's what we get to. yeah, it is very, very reasonable to whatever norms that are accepted to get you ahead in society. It is very reasonable and might not be rooted whatsoever in any sort of bigotry to outside groups to say that if you want to succeed, you should adhere to those norms.
Yeah.
But who set those norms? What is the correct way to speak in America? It is with
I don't know who decides this stuff. Right?
No one, right? Just kind of society does. That's why it's so tough. Like, I don't know if anybody, okay, here's the thing. Nobody in critical race theory or nobody who believes in systemic racism believes that there's this like magic cabal of white people in robes. And when I say robes, not KKK robes, I'm thinking like magic, like leaders of society. We meet in a cave somewhere.
Or smoking men from the X-Files where...
Yeah, like no one thinks that happens. These things are just there is a disproportionate influence from like people with more wealth, people with more control, but these things are not controlled by any one person or any really one group of people. It's a broad societal norms, but they're still perpetuated and they still have effects. So why is this sort of, I don't think I have an accent, but one of the reasons I don't have an accent is because that's the Eastern Kentucky accent. If you have this accent, you're trying to exist in professional spaces. One of the reasons like you want to get rid of this accent is because this is associated with a lower class of less intellect and a lot of other negative factors that have nothing to do with your education, how much research you've done, your ability to communicate points. It's just, this has negative connotations to it. And so you have to change part of your culture to get rid of something that might have like shown people where you came from. You have to change it in order to like succeed more in society. And there's nothing
once you have them, I agree. So maybe you did that for the job interview in a little bit, but after they trust you in your workout, and like, let's say you stop doing it and you kind of fall back into that East Kentucky accent. Now it's actually going to be kind of charming, right? Because they already trust you. So stereotypes, yeah, that they can hold people back, and I agree. And racism is like the high charging of like a negative black stereotype. But what personal experience between people overcomes stereotypes like very quickly.
But that's the thing. Overcoming stereotypes, even if it's not the biggest, let's say that like, if you see someone with a stereotypical blank trait, that makes you 5% less likely to trust them. So something almost insignificant, like 5%, that's not a lot. But that still matters. That's still an impediment that probably shouldn't be there, right?
Yeah, but is it? I don't know. Like, I mean, we take stereotypes of animals or something, right? If you see a brightly colored animal, there's a good chance it's poisonous. That's a stereotype. Not all of them are.
Oh yeah, but, so
you might think danger.
So there's 2 points I want to make here.
So
one,
this is human.
Oh yeah, that's another thing that I think is really, really important. And when we talk about critical race theory, this is why I reject any sort of like interpretation of critical race theory as I understand it. And remember, I'm an idiot. As I understand it, it's not impugning any one individual's moral character. Like if you were born with white skin, you're not a terrible person by virtue of that, because one critical race theory, like it rejects biological essentialism, is that even if you associate zero negative traits with black skin, you still are a human, and we still function under pattern recognition. And so you'll still have a function of what is normal, and anything that deviates from that you'll recognize as not normal. And even if that's all it is, there's no malice there, none whatsoever.
Right, but that's easily overcome, don't you think? After a little bit of time around that person, you might be a little bit skittish at the beginning, but that can be overcome.
Yeah, but you have to think of it from the other perspective, that every single person you meet is going to be their beginning. You're going to have a new beginning.
You're gonna get worn down.
It's like coming out as a gay person.
Deer in Yellowstone come and eat out of your hand. Because they're so they're
here's another.
Humans. That doesn't happen in Eastern Kentucky because you're probably a hunter and they run their ass off.
They should, yeah. Well, we mostly hunt with our trucks on accident.
That's funny. But I wanted to get, like, Bobby Frankenstein in the chat asked, like, overcoming stereotypes at the individual level is not the point. The question is, where do these norms arise and how do they enforce who they benefit? Well, I mean, but that one goes both ways, because, like, with critical race theory, we're creating this new oppressor class for whites. If that's not a stereotype, I don't know what is.
All right.
And that all blacks are victims. We're actually creating more stereotypes that we're going to have to overcome.
Let me use an example that is divorced a little bit from critical race theory. That so you I mean, I know you know what coming out is in terms of an LGBT person, right? You know what that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how do you think that's a single event that you come out once?
It's process. I mean, you probably are talking to multiple people. The coming out is, I don't know. There's
You come
probably
out to
to your
every
parents or something, but you have to
no,
come
you
out.
come out to every single person
Yeah,
you meet.
all you groups of friends, sure.
Yeah, not even groups
College
of friends.
friends maybe or whatever.
So this is how insidious it is. All right, I spent this past weekend playing Resident Evil 8 with my husband. Saying that sentence is coming out to someone who doesn't know that you're married to another man. And in your
Oh, this is what you mean. This
yeah,
is
and in my head, I have to think, do I trust this person enough? Because if it's 1 out of every 100 people, I've been assaulted for being gay before. I meet 100 people. I'll meet 100 people over the course of a year. If it's 1 out of every 100 people that might be dangerous, is that a risk I'm willing to take? And so I have to like trust that person. So the norms of society, like if you are aberrant from the norm, it doesn't have to be malicious intent on the rest of society. It just has to be a deviation from the norm, and that's all it takes. I don't know if there's anything to like fix that, like because humans do have pattern recognition.
probably not. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I could think atheist, right? I guarantee that. Yeah, if with my viewpoints hanging out in Antifa circle, I'm probably in big trouble, right? So yeah, I mean, coming out with certain political views, you could get you in trouble depending on what group you're in.
Yeah, I mean,
So
well, I don't like to group political views in the same as like other like protected classes. Like, cause you have like conservative, liberal, Nazi. I don't like to view conservative like
Candace's coming out as conservative video, like to her black parents, like when she's kind of doing the talk, and have you seen that video?
I have, and I think it's ridiculous. I think it's laughable. I think you can safely like throw her under the bus for being.
It's funny because it's true, because like in the black community, it's weird. Like you talk, you can't really be a Republican, and I'm like, well, what about Larry? Like, yeah, they can, but
well,
it's
to make.
not,
Yeah, to be honest with that, you would have to have the same sympathy for I came out as communist to my conservative parents. You'd have to have the same. You'd have to have the same sympathy to have like.
I sort of would. I would actually.
Or like legitimately, like when I
you said that you wanted to a nonprofit. Remember Family Ties? Like, do you ever watch reruns of that? And like Alex.
Hold on, what did you just say? Watch reruns? How old are you? Do you think people watch TV anymore?
Shit, it's I don't know. I'm older than you, but either way, like that. It was funny when he had to like hide the fact that his father worked for a nonprofit, because he was like this kind of like MAGA Republican guy back under Reagan and stuff.
I can tell you that both my parents were pretty hardcore conservative, and I grew up in a place that was. It's hard to put a percentage to it. I just remember I can't remember. Elementary school. It was Bush v. Bush v. Gore. So I was 9, 10, something like that, 4th or 5th grade. I'm sorry, I can't remember like the exact date. But everybody except one girl said that they would vote for Bush. I said that I would vote for Bush. I was 9. I looked at everyone else. I'm like, Bush? I don't want to be the only person. But so that's the only like inclination of like how conservative. I think my area is very conservative. It consistently goes 70-something% towards the Republican Party. So I had to come out as liberal to my conservative parents. And I can tell you, coming out as liberal to my conservative parents versus coming out as gay to my conservative parents, that's why I laugh at Candace Owens. To put those on the same planet is laughable and insulting.
No, I agree with that analogy. They don't compute, but coming out in a black as conservative, like it's closer. It's closer than your analogy. I agree that coming out as liberal to conservative parents is certainly that is coming out as gay. Certainly, if Candace Owens was white, then no, it doesn't make sense.
All right, so I have no clean way to transition into this, but are you okay if I talk to you about equality under the law? All right, can I talk to you about?
You should do the record rip. You have to just rip.
I don't have I'm not good enough. I have a Stream Deck. I stole it from my husband, who is a tech junkie who likes to get toys. I don't have like cool sound effects set up on it or anything. But can I talk to you about how equality under the law? So I don't know if I can. I'm going to share my screen on my stream. Yeah, so I can't show you in the Discord call, but yeah. So I'm gonna show PDF.
I have the Twitch open too.
Okay, so it's just gonna be a little bit delayed. All right, so this was the paragraph. It'll show up for you in a second, and I'll read it out for you. So this was the paragraph that James Lindsay highlighted as like, this is why CRT is evil. And this is the book that he quoted in his PragerU video. So I don't think this is unfair to say that this is how James Lindsay wants you to view critical race theory. All right. So unlike traditional,
he has it on the new discourses too.
Right. So I'll say, unlike traditional civil rights discourse, which stresses incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism with Enlightenment capitalized, and neutral principles of constitutional law. So I think broadly, I'm not a legal person. I'm sure all of those have very, very distinct, nuanced definitions. But to me, the biggest whoa thing there is equality under the law and how that can still be racist. Is that a fair summarization on my part to probably the biggest?
I mean, the liberal order. I mean, or equality in general. Yeah, sure. All of that. I can see why that's the scare factor. Yeah.
All right. So I can give you 4 examples of how equality under the law can still be overtly and incredibly bigoted. All right. And I'll see if you can tell me where you disagree with all of these.
Okay.
So let's use a historical example first, because that's the easiest one to agree on, because, history is bad. Everyone's bad in history. So right after, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when public services were beginning to be integrated, one of the biggest battlegrounds, for lack of a better word, were swimming pools, like public swimming pools, because swimming is cool. It's awesome. I have very, very fond memories of my public pool when I was a kid. They're great. However, a lot of public places, rather than integrating, white people did not want to share that space with black people. Some of it was because people thought that black people were dirty, or that somehow their blackness would seep into the water or some crazy shit. But the bottom line is, a lot of white people did not want to share the pool with black people. People at the time, that could have been someone. It's probably someone's grandmother that is still alive, or someone's great grandmother that they met when they were a kid. But the bottom line is, a lot of city ordinances decided that rather than integrate, they would close down swimming pools. Now, rather than integrate, they would close down swimming pools. Was that racist?
That's pretty crazy. I mean, that's if they're going to close something down rather than integrate it, your fear is, that's a racist fear.
Well, no. The answer is no. It wasn't racist, because they didn't shut it down for black people. They shut it down for everybody. That was the legal reasoning. It passed it in court.
Of course, the legal reasoning. Yeah, but so assuming that,
But equality under the law said that wasn't racist. It didn't violate the Constitution. It didn't violate any Civil Rights Act, because since they shut it down for everybody, not targeting black people, then it wasn't racist.
Yeah, because there's racist intent behind it, but they didn't violate a law.
Right. That's the hard part. Proving intent is damn impossible. It's damn near impossible.
It's hard.
Even when when was that over? When literally white people showed up with weapons to keep black families out of the pool, they couldn't prove racism. Because how would you prove that?
Right, but there would have to be I don't know how you would be able to get, if you could make a law to so you could pull public services like that. I don't know. That it's interesting.
So
the prove intent. It's like if we got into a fight at the bar and one of us killed each other, that's murder 2. But if one of us had planned it the whole time, now that could easily be murder 1. You'd have to prove the intent.
Right. All evidence is circumstantial, right?
Could. I just don't know if there was a law written to do it.
Right, so here's another one. So so in that example, I think it's pretty clear. I'm not saying it's representative, but in this instance, equality under the law can still harbor racist intent. Right, so I'm not saying it's representative. I'm saying, but that's just I'm opening the doorway to say that can exist. Okay.
Yep,
Here,
I would agree.
here's another one. So, and this is going away from race theory, but it's still within the realms of critical theory. The argument against gay marriage was it is not discriminatory. Nobody can marry someone of their same gender, and gay people can still get married like everybody else. See how that's still equal?
Right.
Right. It's not discriminating against gay people.
I mean, Justin, you are free to marry a woman just like I am, right?
Right.
Yep. Okay.
So
right. Yeah, but you could say that.
Yeah, and so that was a legitimate argument. It didn't hold water, but if you were just looking at the letter of the law, it didn't discriminate against identities. Like a gay person could do everything a straight person could do, and so. Yeah, but obviously that didn't hold water because you thought about it for a second. You put some subjectivity into it, and you read into intent a little bit. Put some of that postmodernist, neo-Marxist like interpretation.
Well, no, you were saying that the thing is that when you were married, it wasn't just if marriage didn't confer X benefits. Like if marriage was just a sticker, a gold sticker, then.
Oh, we wanted more.
May not have been the thing, but marriage conveys a couple of benefits, especially if you have a child, right? Where the next of kin is going to go, and also giving your money at death to your spouse without having to go through like an estate tax. These are some pretty massive benefits of marriage that gay people didn't have access to.
I can tell you something that has nothing. Oh, so I agree with all of that stuff.
So that was the reason. Yeah. That was the reasoning behind it. Had marriage not conveyed any if that was just this cool little sticker, I'm not sure if it would have worked.
See, if
gay marriage would have gone through.
This is purely anecdotal from my part, so don't take this as like an objective, like rational argument. I don't care about all that stuff because again, I'm dumb. I'm not 100% sure what benefits marriage, like legal benefits marriage has on me, other than I can ask my husband to file our taxes for us. So I don't have to deal with it. 100%. I'm not joking. That's the only thing I'm really cognizant of. I guess like I kind of know that, yeah, like we can leave our estates to each other when we die and all that stuff. The reason I wanted to get married is because.
What if you had a child? If you had a child.
that too.
Child and he didn't. That could end up going.
Oh, that too. So we do
have rights to the kid. That's a big.
Oh no, that too. I shouldn't have. Yeah, obviously. So we do plan on having kids, and so obviously we both want to have equal parentage of the kid. But the biggest reason that I proposed and the biggest reason that I wanted to get married is from this like societal expectation that if you meet somebody and you love them, being married is the sign that you are like from a sociological like social construct standpoint. Nothing to do with legality, nothing to do with like benefits. That means that person is connected to you in a deeper way. That's why, and again, this is just anecdotal. That's why I wanted to get married, because when I called him my husband, that's way different, in my opinion, than calling him my boyfriend. Boyfriend, girlfriend sounds to me, and this could be biased on my part. You can call me out in chat if I'm shitty here. But when I call when you call someone your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your NB
partner,
friend, partner, that has less weight to it than your wife or your husband or whatever the NB equivalent of that is.
I agree. And they asked this question, I think, like during that hearing, one of the justices asked the lawyers that were fighting against this, and they said, well, what is the potential harm to married people if we allow this? And they couldn't. They basically said, well, there might be something that we don't know of. Like they couldn't come up with anything. It was just like, well, when you change things, shit happens.
Well,
which wasn't a good enough argument. You had to show that this would hurt straight marriage to some degree. If you could, then maybe they would have an argument. They couldn't show it. Because, and I think that was the point. That was another thing that they were missing is, I guess what I'm describing is the cool sticker. You're saying, yeah, but Brian, that cool sticker is pretty meaningful.
Yeah, I will 100% take the cool sticker argument. I will make that earnestly. I like having the cool sticker. Yeah. It means something to me.
I just wonder if the cool sticker would have been enough to get it through the courts. It may have.
Yeah, but you think about like what seem on like a logic 101 level to be very weak arguments in favor of traditional marriage. I always love that. No one attacked traditional marriage at any point in time. That was never an argument. No one was attacking traditional marriage. They were in favor of gay marriage.
Sort of are now, right?
Nope.
And that's well, the BLM, like we don't like we question the nuclear family and things like that.
No, we question it. We question the requirement, which means that if you don't want to get married, you should still be supported. That's not attacking traditional.
So that was the second one. You had two more.
All right.
Two more.
Well, I miscounted. I miscounted to 4. Okay, I have one more. All right, you can't expect me to count to 4. All right. Shit. I had a point to finish, and then fuck. Anyway, finishing that point before getting to the next one, there does seem to be this, if you are of the privileged class, any introduction of alternative options feels like an attack. Like, if you could be anything other than straight, that feels like an attack on straight people. If any marriage exists other than the traditional marriage, that feels like an attack on traditional marriage. And if you are used to being the racial majority in your country, the standard, the modus operandi of your country, if that changes, that feels like an attack on you. So that's equality feels like oppression, all that fun stuff. The last example, or the last, I should say last example and a half, the North Carolina voting law wasn't racist under the equality definition of the law. So the North Carolina voting law basically outlawed certain forms of voter ID. But now, under the legal letter of the law, it did not target black people. It didn't say black people couldn't vote. It didn't say white people's votes count more. It was complete equality under the law. However, they found what forms of ID black people were more likely to use and outlawed those. And so, even though no one could use IDs, black people were way more disproportionately affected. And so even though it wasn't a racist law and that the letter of race wasn't written into it, it was still deemed by anybody who took a look at it honestly, who dared to look at something other than the objective letter of the law to read intent behind something, said, yeah, obviously this is racist. You picked with surgical, the exact wording was surgical precision. You picked what things would hurt black people the most and decided to outlaw those.
Okay, but the things that they outlawed, what do you remember what they were?
I remember they were, I remember the court decision, and I remember they outlawed certain forms of voter ID that black people disproportionately used.
Because you used to be able to take an electrical bill. Wisconsin's had voter ID for a little while, but when I voted here, and I've been voting here since 2000, remember I used to present my ID because I thought I had to, and they would be like, no, put that thing back into your wallet, like it was, I don't know, like I was pulling out a gun or something. It was weird, and you just didn't have to show anything. And then even to register, you didn't need an ID. You could show just like a Wisconsin energy spill. I mean, you could see that there's potential voter fraud going on there, and you might have disproportionate impact, but it seems like, why wouldn't you just then quickly fire up a campaign to get everyone IDs? Why aren't 501c3s in there to say, all right, no problem, we'll just get everyone IDs?
So voter disenfranchisement is not meant to be a wall; it's meant to be a hurdle.
But voter suppression, do you think there's voter suppression in Georgia right now? They keep talking about
without exception, unambiguously, yes.
But their voting laws are less restrictive than Delaware's. So doesn't Joe Biden need to kick his home state in the ass?
Yeah. I think there should be as few restrictions to voting as possible. To me, in my eyes.
At some point there has to be some, or else you're going to get massive amounts of fraud. Right, you do see the trade-off between easier voting and accurate voting.
To me, I would always. All right, so I'll explain. So I'm going to come back to this. So I'm going to backtrack first, but I'll say I will always err on the side of less restriction than more restriction, for reasons I'll explain here in a second. So.
But why would you do the
voter suppression? Is not.
I go into get a surgery without proving who I was, or maybe fake my medical history?
well, that's not exactly an analogous. Like, medical history is not like, I'm faking my thing to get like this awesome surgery that was super trendy. Like, that's a different analogy. I don't think those things are analogous. But with voter suppression, it's never about putting up walls. It's about putting up hurdles. So the goal is never to keep a certain group of people from voting. It's to put up enough
Hurdles.
enough inconveniences to say, fuck it, it's not worth it. And we have this idea of the voter in our mind, the ideal voter, that they'll go through anything to vote. But the reality is, most people, if it's not convenient, they won't fucking do it. Which is why
You want those people voting? Would you honestly
Yes.
care? Like, come on.
Yes.
Okay, so what about reading? You have to read the ballot. Isn't like reading a barrier to entry?
Sure. It is.
Right. So
If you can read the ballot enough to vote for it, you get to vote. Because here's the thing. I don't want to prioritize old people who have retired, who don't have anywhere to be on a Tuesday afternoon. They are disproportionately represented in our voting block. Because right now, you got 1 day without the mail-in voting, without the absentee voting, you got 1 day to vote, buddy. And you better hope that you can get to the polling place between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Georgia has more early voting than Delaware or Colorado, where they moved the All-Star.
Well, good. That's good. That's great. All the other states, no, use that to call out those other states for having more restrictive voting, not the other way around.
Okay,
because it is ridiculous.
So Major League Baseball needs torched then for moving it from a quote-unquote racist voting state to even more racist.
First of all, who the fuck still cares about baseball? Have you watched a baseball game ever in your life? You think you have, you haven't.
I fantasy baseball was like in a daily league on fantasy baseball is the best fantasy sports ever. Like way better than football. Like I used to love baseball when I was doing that.
Yeah, you love baseball when you removed the baseball from it. I believe that, yeah.
But because then I had like a stake in the game because it's like Tampa Bay and St. Louis actually.
Well, yeah, because otherwise you'd have to actually watch a baseball game, and we can't expect that.
It's fun when you're betting on the games. It's a lot of fun.
Okay, but
try that. So try that sometime, and if you still hate it, then I'll just say, Justin, you hate baseball.
Okay. So the point, fuck, I started talking about how much I hate baseball,
but
and that just confused.
I said that we moved from a racist state to even more racist state.
All right, no, well, seriously, the states that restrict voting laws the most, to me, and it's most prevalent in Georgia just because that's the state that introduced the laws, and so that's what's on everyone's mind. It's a solution in search of a problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
So it cuts down on voter fraud, but in order for that to be a legitimate argument, you need to prove. So why is voter fraud bad? Let's start there. Why is voter fraud bad?
Because you want accurate elections, right? We would agree that we want accurate outcomes. You just don't want random. You don't want like this. You don't want happens in like Iraq or Russia.
Well, and more likely, you don't want disenfranchisement of legitimate voters. You don't want your vote being canceled out by someone who didn't deserve it, right?
First, you want accuracy, right? Because
that's what I mean by accuracy.
Voter franchise, but then I've just stuffed it with a bunch of ballots of John Doe that are fake.
No, well, that's what I mean by like disenfranchisement. The reason you want accuracy is because you don't want your vote as a real citizen being drowned out by illegitimate votes. So we're kind of saying the same thing. So in my mind, if that's the problem you're trying to solve, the solution should not make it worse. If you are a citizen of this country, you are legally allowed to vote. But if you are a citizen,
you have to strike a balance. I mean, the perfect golf club is like it's the hardest. It's also it's light, swinging. All these things are in balance, right? A Ferrari is a great car, but it doesn't go off road.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, in order for the balance to be in order for the balance to be stricken, the problem that you're trying to solve is voter disenfranchisement. So you want to take away illegitimate votes to give more weight to the legitimate votes. But if your solution takes away far more legitimate votes, and legitimate just means you're a citizen of this country, if it takes away far more legitimate votes than it gets rid of illegitimate votes, then you have not solved the problem. You have made the problem worse. And the motivations behind that is questionable.
Right. I mean, because one or two fraudulent votes isn't going to make a big difference, right? But significant amount will. So yeah, I mean, it's just whatever is the most accurate. But I mean, you have to balance. Take the Second Amendment. You have to balance safety and people's right to bear arms. You do not want people that are mentally ill getting these guns, passing a background check, not having like super criminality. These are all reasonable limitations to be able to govern a gun. So you'd set that bar somewhere, and some states set it lower.
But if there were no mass shootings in the United States, that would drastically change our perception of what legally would be reasonable to encourage, right?
Maybe. I mean, just because there was no shootings, would you just lower the bar on things? I wouldn't. Well, because maybe the bar is the reason you don't have the shooting.
Well, in this hypothetical world where there was no mass shootings, I would say like, no, there's no reason to lower. There's no reason to have restrictions on gun ownerships because they're not causing any problems. Like this is in this vastly hypothetical world. And so for Georgia,
but why would you do it? Like to say that we don't need terrorist watch groups, the FBI doing that because he had to have a terrorist attack. Well, maybe it's because they're getting them caught.
Well, okay, how about this? Is there any? This is a legitimate question. Is there any legal reason why you can't buy as much rubbing alcohol as you want?
I don't think there's.
I don't think there is.
That's weird.
However, if you drink a lot of rubbing alcohol, you'll die.
It's true. You drink enough water, you'll die.
Yeah, exactly. So if this were introduced, if hypothetically we had a bunch of people who were just drinking rubbing alcohol all the live one day, and we had an epidemic of people dying from drinking rubbing alcohol, then I would be way more amenable to like putting legal restrictions on the amount of rubbing alcohol you could buy. So it's not necessarily like, yeah, that stuff's dangerous if used in the wrong way, but if it's not a problem, I want to maximize freedom, right?
Sure. As long as it's not limiting somebody else. Like if all of a sudden, limiting that rubbing alcohol then would shut down X amount of businesses that needed it. You have to weigh.
It's all about maximizing freedom. And unlimited freedom minimizes freedom. Yeah.
Correct. You want to maximize freedoms. Right. I agree.
Right.
Yeah. At some point, if you do that too much, you have anarchy.
Right. So in this case, like,
and I'm definitely not an anarchist.
With Georgia, I think they had 35 cases of voter fraud. Most of them were related to people who were registered to vote that shouldn't have been. There's a case of like a couple of votes being weirdly calculated, like it was a clerical error, which is going to happen, right? Clerical errors are going to happen. Human error is going to happen. And there were 4 unregistered voters who voted. So 4 legitimate cases of voter fraud. And of them, when you think voter fraud, what do you think the average American pictures?
I don't know, someone voting twice, somebody who's, I don't know, not a citizen voting.
Do you think it would be unfair to say that a lot of Trump voters, I'm going to limit it to Trump voters, do you think that that it would be unfair to generalize Trump voters thinking that illegal votes meant brown people voting?
I think they'd probably mean Biden votes.
Well, Biden votes from brown people, right?
I don't know. I think I've never heard him say that. I just think that Biden votes. Like most of this stuff is coming through things like, I don't know, Dominion changing votes. But that didn't happen.
Yeah, that didn't happen.
That's not even a. I know, but that's a computer program. Not that they're not implying any racial.
Yeah, but they are implying like people. The solutions have nothing to do with.
Vote.
Yeah, the solution that they're proposing in Georgia has nothing to do with like computer programming. It's people.
I just don't see a lot of voter suppression when
I don't see a lot of voter fraud.
People in Georgia per capita, and then to say, oh well, it should be even higher. Really?
Well, hold on. I don't see a lot of voter fraud in Georgia.
Much different than white America.
I don't see a lot of voter fraud in Georgia.
Right, I know, but I don't see any voter suppression either, and they're screaming out of voter suppression.
No, any restriction on voting is voter suppression. All right. By definition. No. Hold on. Let me explain myself. Any restriction on voting is voter suppression. Now, some of it is legitimate and some of it is not. That we restrict voting to people who are 18 and older, that is voter suppression. By definition. we restrict people who are not 18 yet from voting. Would you agree with that?
Okay, but the word. This is like saying now you're going to have to you justify the libertarian argument that the government is robbing me as opposed to I'm paying my taxes.
Well, no, I'm
the connotation of the word suppression there.
Well, I'm trying to. In this conversation, we don't have to worry about like we can define our terms within this conversation. So when I say voter suppression, it encompasses any person that you say is not able to vote. So in this conversation, we defined it.
So voter suppression is like the person that says, "I don't care, I'm not voting."
No. It's anybody who is influenced not to vote. Some of it's legitimate. Like, I don't think 3 month olds, I don't think babies should vote. How about that?
Okay, good. We are in utter agreement.
All right, cool. So those voters should be suppressed.
Okay.
All right, but that is still voter suppression. I don't think people who have killed another human being in cold blood should vote.
Okay.
So I don't think murderers should vote. So that is.
I'm with you on that.
So that's legitimate voter suppression. We would still call that voter suppression, right?
I would call it you've lost your right to vote.
Yeah. So you've been suppressed, but it's legitimate. Legitimate suppression.
I mean, yeah, I guess I just don't like the word.
I know it's the connotation, like
connotation I don't like. But
killing somebody has a bad connotation to it. But if you contextualize it to say, well, actually, this person was about to step on a baby's head, it's fine. I know, like the connotation to certain words is bad, but how about
okay? Somebody says not suppression, limitation.
Limitation.
I like that word better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we can. Well, it semantically it doesn't make any difference. Like we're limiting votes. So we'll limit votes from babies. We'll limit votes from felons. But now we're also limiting votes from people who don't have the proper ID. Now, in the United States, if you're a citizen who is of legal age, who has not committed a felony, you can vote. Those are the restrictions that we place on voting. However, what we do to prove that can limit voting unnecessarily. You have to have a specific ID. Now, this is something that is news to me.
Now, what if you had to have a passport to vote?
Right. How many people have a passport?
Unreasonable limitation on voting rights.
Right. So this is something that is new to me. I thought everybody had a driver's license. If you live in rural America, you have to have a driver's license. Otherwise, you are not getting to anywhere. Right? There's nothing that you can do in a rural city without a driver's license. But apparently, there's a lot of people, like Lil Nas X. Lil Nas X is, 22? Just got his driver's license. That's insane to me. But it turns out, in places that I'm not familiar with, it's actually pretty common not to have a driver's license.
Right. But see, this is the trick that they make, is they'll say, they cite and that they're accurate when they cite driver's license. But then they perceive that driver's license means ID. Like, these people have an ID, they don't have a driver's license.
All right.
So out of valid ID, I could choose not to drive and have an ID. Heck, the Amish have ID.
All right, how about this? And I'll fully admit I'm not 100% sure on this, but would you accept something like a student ID as a valid ID? Let's say it was from
I'm not a voting expert, so if for whatever reason
me neither. I know.
Wanted to accept it, then it would be fine to me. If they determined that this works, I mean, sure. But I don't. As long as it's good enough, and that Wisconsin basically decided that it was too easy to have a copy of somebody else's We Energy bill.
Can I clarify something from my chat? If you have served your sentence, I think you should be able to vote. All right. I'm making sure for my chat.
I could be convinced on any of this.
Yeah, if you have served your sentence, I'm for it. And also, if you are convicted of a drug felony, no restrictions. You should be able to vote because.
Yeah, you're right. Violent crime is going to be worse than and this is weird. But certainly, if you're out, I think that you should get your rights back. That I definitely agree with.
Awesome.
But so those things on. Okay, what do you think? And when you're talking about, I want to go back to the legal theory that you pointed out.
Sure.
What do you believe on like a reasonable person standard? Like for some laws are based on what a reasonable manufacturer might do in product liability, or what a reasonable person might do. Like if you've hit someone with the car, but they've just popped out in front of you, you've skid the tires, and they're trying to determine whether or not you were negligent driving. And they determined that you swerved and you did what a reasonable person might do, but it turns out the swerve is what you shouldn't have done, and you hit up, right? But then you get off because. So do you believe in a reasonable person standard?
So there's 2 points to that. One, fuck, I just remembered the 4th thing. God damn it. Okay. So it's up to you. Do I say you the 4th thing, or is it justifiably like?
Quick say it. Yeah.
Okay, quick saying. Crack cocaine versus regular cocaine.
Okay.
All right, so that's all I'm going to say. Like crack cocaine versus regular cocaine. Yep. Black people tend to use crack cocaine more than regular cocaine. Yep. But since anybody could use crack cocaine, so equality under the law, disproportionate to black people. Cool.
Disproportionate impact. Yeah, sure.
All right, so fourth point made, I win. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
So what about but what do you think about like a reasonable person?
So I think this is all the law can do. This is all the law can do. It's what would a reasonable person do in this scenario. The trouble with this, and there is no perfect solution to this, is because reasonable is always going to be subjective. If someone claims to have an objective standard of what a reasonable person would do, you should kick that person in the shins for being an idiot, because no, that thing doesn't exist. But what society deems a reasonable person is going to be colored through a certain cultural lens. So for example, if someone reaches their hand out to you, like they're just meeting you, they're smiling, they're reaching their hand out to you, what's the reasonable thing to do?
Yeah, shake their hand.
Shake their hand, okay. If you didn't come from a culture where that's a normal thing, you're not going to do the reasonable thing. I know that's a small example, but it's an example of how like a
reasonable person would understand that too. A reasonable person would understand that somebody from a different culture might not mean any offense by that.
Might not, with hindsight, but a lot of people would like for example, how about smiling during a picture? If someone doesn't smile when they have their picture, this has broader connotations than just this. If someone does not smile when they have their picture taken, is that right? What a reasonable person does?
The reasonable person standards, I don't mean to think it's all a reasonable person. So you had 100 people that said, okay, I'd shake your hand, maybe 30 didn't, or this and that. Like a certain number, you don't need all 100 people to say, yeah, I would do that. You would just need most, like even 10 of them that said that they would do that might be a reasonable person.
Well, yeah, but who cares what the actual statistics say, right?
And we could say whatever, but the point is, critical race theory hates a reasonable person standard because they don't believe that there are reasonable people because. Again, all we are is socially constructed. Well,
no, they're going to point. They're going to point to
that if a black person did get an all-black jury, that they could never receive a fair trial.
But
that's.
Well, no, they're attacking.
That's an argument that critical race theory makes.
But they're making the same argument that I have, that what is deemed a reasonable person is socially constructed, and it's socially constructed about what the norm is. Again, this doesn't have to have anything to do with malice. It doesn't have to have anything to do with abject bigotry. It could just be what are the norms you associate. Let's say how about period of dress? Let's say we have two people that are equal suspects in robbing a convenience store. One came in wearing a do-rag and sweatpants and a basketball jersey, and one came in wearing a business suit. Who's the subject? Who is the suspect? Their dress should have nothing to do with it, right? Either one of them could have robbed this store, right? But what do we associate with criminal behavior? What are the norms? What would a reasonable person assume in this scenario? And you can see what the reasonable person would assume is built on stereotypes, not on logic.
Right, but it's usually what a reasonable person would do, and I don't know. You could say, I just don't know if that's the standards they're based on assuming, because you're right, that's a stereotype.
Yeah, but in my opinion, a reasonable person would probably assume that the person who wasn't in the business suit was the suspect.
Sure.
However,
right, but as long as we don't convict the person, who cares if the reasonable assumption is wrong?
Well, because that's how we convict people, based on assumptions.
No, you base it on evidence. It's not based on. The trend trial is, hey, check out what this guy's wearing and check out what this guy's wearing. They're going to be like, well, where was he?
There were also a lot of Well, that's not. Well, oftentimes it's not as simple as that. Like, for example, in the Chauvin trial, no one disagreed on what actions occurred. We disagree. The disagreement was on whether those actions were justified, and that's where those norms can come into play.
Yeah.
Is
Because
it?
for me, like the third degree manslaughter, I think could have gone like you could make a really good case for that. I think the murder two was probably. I was surprised that they got that. But yeah, but I can see that one going both ways.
But yeah,
Certainly,
but why were you surprised that he got murder two? And can you just I definitely remember what murder two is, but just in case I forgot, can you tell me what murder two means?
because
Just in
I don't
case.
think that he was intending to kill him, like or tending to produce violent harm that could have done this. I honestly don't think that
I
he was doing that. I think that he was kind of clueless and
correct me if I'm
not doing it
wrong.
right.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. That second degree murder can also just be gross negligence, right?
Yeah, but you have to be aware that what you're doing could cause some grievous injury.
So, do you think that like kneeling on somebody's neck for 9 minutes could cause grievous injury? Do you think that's? Do you think a reasonable? Okay, hold on. Do you think a reasonable person would suspect that kneeling on somebody's neck for 9 minutes would cause injury, potentially
Again,
fatal injury?
I mean, if he was trained this way, it's hard to say. I don't know. I like. Do you think that he was again like the third degree, the two lower charges? I think are there.
Well, hold on. Under the
Certainly
reasonable
the third
person standard, a reasonable person would know. Yeah, kneeling on somebody's neck for 9 minutes, of course that would hurt somebody. Doesn't matter what his training is. A reasonable person wouldn't agree with his
I
training.
don't know. Then there the other angle. They said he was on his shoulder. I don't know. I looked. It was hard for me to tell. So I mean, if he perceived that he was on his shoulder, I don't know. But I mean, I didn't want to get too like into the Chauvin.
I gotcha. It's just the
Specifically-
example, right?
But I just think we're headed back to a segregated society if we think that black people can't understand white people and vice versa. Like if there has to be a reasonable person standard, or else instead we're gonna have a reasonable black person standard, a reasonable white person standard, and
This feels like the last third of our conversation, which means would you be upset if I asked you for another bathroom break?
go ahead.
Okay, I'll be back. Well,
Maybe I'll go grab another beer.
awesome. Well, I need another
Okay,
bourbon, so we'll be back. All right,
Yeah.
back.
Oh, Bobby Frankenstein in the chat says like the races can't understand each other. It's not part of CRT, but it is. It is part of standpoint epistemology. That if you don't have that lived experience, you can't know what it's like to be the other person. I mean, so standpoint epistemology is absolutely what I'm talking about, and they do say that you can't understand that other person.
Do you think that's
you need the experience.
Do you think there's some legitimacy? Now, I have my problems with the worst interpretation of that as well. I have my problems with that too. But do you think there's some legitimacy to you can only know, truly know, and even then, you probably don't know your own experiences, but that's all you can ever truly know is what you have personally experienced because
No.
because perception is reality, right?
No, because I can't understand what it's like to be gay, right? But I can listen to you. I can talk to other guys. I can get pretty damn close. I can get close enough to be, to sit on your jury.
Yeah, and all that stuff is great. I believe that fully too. So I'm not trans. I'm cis. I'm not trans, but I think I can listen to enough trans people to have a good, like just using the basic process of human empathy to understand what it's sort of like to say that. But however, my experiences are always going to be limited by what I have access to. Like I can't talk to every single trans person. I can't. I can only get a vague idea of it. And there are limitations. And I would actually argue that if you are gay, you don't know what it's like to be gay, pure, like the universal experience. You only have your personal experiences of being gay to do it. So I do have my criticisms of that. But what I've understood is that like, and this is again I don't think that CRT says anything because it's a theory. It's inanimate. It's
well, that's standpoint epistemology. So I guess conceivably you could be a critical race theorist and not believe in standpoint epistemology. And we probably could dig through literature and find somebody like that. I'm sure. So CRT, I'll give you this. Is it the best moniker in the world? I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, this is why people use woke sometimes, which is I remember when it said, like, what are the things when you think you're going to have a bad conversation with somebody, what word comes up and you think that's going to...
Yeah, mine was woke because it doesn't mean anything anymore.
And what did I put? anti-fascist. That's what I put. And I get it. So sometimes woke gets subbed in there. I think critical theory as a whole is probably a better moniker because it's a bigger umbrella to all of this.
Yeah. So, for example,
and like
I told you this. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then because you were kind of saying, well, Robin DiAngelo's not CRT, and it's like, yeah, maybe. And even Kimberly Crenshaw's response, written through like,
well, can I clarify that?
He differentiated. He called it there's critical race studies and critical race theory.
Can I clarify that? I think depending on the definition you're going, you could put DiAngelo under critical race theory. I don't like it's kind of like the postmodernist conundrum. I don't like applying a moniker to somebody. I like to say, what do they say they are? And I like to take that as the truer definition. I know that's limited, but I'd prefer, like CRT, if you believe in postmodernism or if you believe in CRT, I prefer that to be the true definition. Does that make sense? Do you think that's fair?
Yeah. No, it's fair. And the labels are hard. So, I mean, yeah, we're mostly talking about those ideas. But then when trying to convey something like into a point, you've got to try to use something.
Yeah.
And so the CRT is the one that seems to be getting used, even though I agree, it's got some warts on it.
So, if we take it a little bit back from critical theory, so queer theory, I think, it might just be because I have an identity that lets me identify with it more, is awesome. It's fucking based. It's incredible. And the best description of queer theory that really sold me on the idea, and I told you this back in Kenosha, was from James Lindsay's book. Apparently, he was supposed to be convincing me that queer theory is damaging to the gay, to LGBT rights, and that it was like, oh, it's horrible. But based on his description of it, and I have to clarify this, when he was just quoting what they said, queer theory is awesome. It shows that, tell
me why.
It shows that, deviations from the norm are seen as bad because they're shocking, and that necessarily limits a lot of personal identities. So if you saw I think a really good example of this is people like The Quartering, or Tim Pool, or Lauren Chin. Anytime there's an LGBT person introduced in a new TV show, what do they call it?
I don't know, woke.
Woke. Yeah, this show has gone woke. Like if
retconning or something.
Yeah, retconning, despite the fact that the show was written, like today, or if there's a kid, God forbid, there's a kid show. You see, when a boy and a girl kiss in a kid's show, that's fine. But when a boy and a boy kiss in a kid's show, that's degeneracy. Kids shouldn't see that. And that's woke dogma. Do you see how that is? This stuff is homophobic. If you think a boy and a boy kissing in a kid's show is homophobic, it is like a woke nonsense or indoctrination, it's because you're homophobic with no other qualifications. There's no other reason.
Right. But queering goes farther, right? So you queer things to the point of gender abolition. Right, and that seems outrageous.
So, and this is
gender.
Yeah, and this
That's
is
part of queer theory.
All right. So, if there's one stereotype of the left, I want you to hold on to, it's that we hate ourselves. Okay, can I get you to hold on to that at least? All right. The left.
What is it? Is it because this search for James Lindsay thinks it's this search for authenticity?
It might be
nothing's authentic, and you're trying to find that.
That's probably a component of it, but James Lindsay has never been correct about anything he's ever said. So I'm sort of kidding, but also James Lindsay.
Yeah, but there's some point to that because I remember talking about stuff. Me and my buddy one time it was 23 years old. We're on a cruise and we go to Barbados. We stop there and we were like, there's all the expensive shops and all this beautiful stuff there. Probably we can't afford anyways. And then we wanted to see the real Barbados because we felt like, okay, there's something authentic Barbados, but this ain't it. So we finally got this cab driver. We want to see the real Barbados. And he didn't know what the fuck we were talking about. And he was like, what? And then he was like, oh, I know what you want. You want women. And I'm like, oh God, please do not take us to
a brothel or something.
Brothel. Please do not. And we're like, no, we just want to see it. So this guy didn't know what to do. So he basically just drove up the island. We got inside. Pretty soon we saw no white people. And he took us to his local hangout. And then when we walked in the door, man, everybody fucking looked. And it was bizarre. No one had ever seen. We were obviously tourists. And no one had ever seen anything there. And then the bartender was great. He kind of looked and he's like, I got you guys, which meant we'll be safe because a small crowd got built up of people in the town staring at us And then meanwhile, like our driver got completely hammered. When we drove back, he actually puked at a light because he just drank enough gin and tonic. So amazingly, we went back. But on our quest for authenticity, proved that there wasn't real, it's just like
Authenticity on a broad sense is
of
myth.
Barbados was you have a rich area and you've got a poor area. That's
So
what it was.
two things on that. Yeah, authenticity is for places, for broad things, is a myth. People can be authentic, places cannot be. There's no true essence of a place. But also, did you know what it like? Was that a good experience to tell you what it felt like to be othered?
Oh yeah, it was really interesting. The whole experience was interesting. Like one, that we were on a quest for authenticity that it turned up absolutely nothing. And yeah, to be a complete foreigner, and then literally to be eyeballed. Like there was 2 or 3 people watching. We stayed there for like maybe 2 or 3 hours.
Can I ask you a question?
And like by that time there's 50 people just watching, staring.
Can I ask you a question? If you had to pick one place in the United States to give someone the authentic American experience, do you think you could pick one?
God, I don't know. I think I would. I think I'd pick Wisconsin. I'd take him to some supper club in Wisconsin.
See, to me, I would say objectively, no. There's no answer that was going to give you.
Well, there isn't, right? I know, because there's all that kinds of missing. I guess the thing is there. It's like it has a lot of different pieces, but there's no thought to it.
So I went to Wisconsin. A lot of it was familiar, but a lot of it was alien to me because I've lived in very tiny rural Kentucky. I've lived in the second biggest city in Kentucky. I live in a small town in Kentucky now. And just those 3 places in Kentucky, which one of them are the most authentic Kentucky to me, I don't know. They're all 3 very, very different.
Yeah, that's right. I might think that it's Louisville, right? And you're like, dude, that ain't Kentucky.
Okay, at least you said Louisville and not Louisville or Louisville.
And my roommate was from Louisville.
Okay, that's how you know how to say it correctly.
In college, that's how I know how to do it. That's how I do it. I didn't listen to country music until then. He introduced me to Charlie Pride, and fucking David Allan Coe. This shit was
okay. I'm going to introduce you to Old Crow Medicine Show and Trampled by Turtles next, okay? But you can see how what I think is damaging to the discourse is when I think a lot of people view, if we talk about anti-black racism, a lot of people kind of intrinsically associate that with anti-white racism, because who is being racist against black people? It just intuitively, when you think anti-black racism, who do you think is being racist against black people?
Other races other than black.
And mostly white people, right?
And if you go on Clubhouse, you can find that there's this massive problem between Nigerians and American black people, as well as Caribbeans.
Of course.
You have these ADOs, American descendants of slaves, versus black immigrants. You can't tell apart. They're both very black, and then they're screaming, "You're taking our scholarships." So there's quite a bit of hate there too. So you could have anti-black.
Well, of course, if we get it,
black Americans are their own subculture. It's their own group.
Well, of course, like you can atomize it as much as you want, but the point I was trying to make there is that when you think anti-black racism, a lot of people will, I think, reasonably and rationally think, well, who's being racist against black people? Mostly white people. And then they think, well, since racism is bad, they're impugning white people. They're saying this is a moral failure on white people. Anti-black racism is a moral failure on white people. And so it ends up this weird math where if you
certainly was in 1965. Yes.
Well,
currently
we'll say that we'll finish on that here in a second. But we end up in this scenario where the math works out that that someone experiencing racism and being called a racist are equivalent in our society. And that's dangerous. I've seen a lot of like memes saying that. And yeah, I can. This is a moment of reaching across the aisle. I've been called racist. I've been called white supremacist before, because I've been on Twitter for more than 20 seconds. Okay, it happens. There are people on Twitter. Yeah, there are people who have called me racist and white supremacist. And while I would say some of the criticism that I've gotten based on those accusations, I think was fair. I think it was a reasonable misinterpretation of what I said. Notice I said reasonable misinterpretation, as in like, I could see how a reasonable person would misconstrue what I said. And hey, I'm an idiot. Maybe I don't know this is not like a
Right, and
self-deprecating
are you
thing.
allowed a couple fuck ups? Like that's the thing. Maybe on Twitter we should have like 5 fuck ups per month that reset,
There
and
you
like
go.
you can see where you're at.
Yeah, you can see.
You balled out or something.
Well, it should be higher than that for my sake.
Okay, fine.
But
Yeah.
we can see
But at
like,
least.
but we can see like I have a lot of assumptions on my part because I grew up in America. I grew up white in America. I saw, and this is I need to tell you this. All right, I interacted with my first black person when I was 15. You see how that can like really, and then I had no control over that.
No, I think that's the same for me too. It's the same for me. Although I interacted with a lot of Mexican people and Indian, but I think the first black person, was in my high school.
Yeah, but do we see how it doesn't take malice? It doesn't take hatred. But if you don't interact with somebody, if you only see them through media. Now, I've seen black people through media, and this is one of the reasons I think it's very, very important for media representation. I don't think black representation, LGBT representation, women representation, I don't think any of that stuff is trivial at all because I still knew of black people based on media.
Right, but somebody could have seen the Cosby Show prior to ever meeting a black person.
And that's why, I think it's important.
Had a positive thing coming in.
Yeah, and that's why I think media representation is important.
The Cosby Show was actually hugely important. I wish you wouldn't have been doing that.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great if that wasn't retroactively ruined, right?
I know. It really was.
Well, okay. Better. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Better option.
Yeah,
not tainted. Only aged like wine, right? That's a better option.
Right. I know, but then you got Prince, who's more authentically black than say Carlton. Who are equally black now. But his Uncle Phil, is somewhere in the middle, right?
He's a conservative black man. Like canonically in the show, he's conservative, or at least he was a Republican.
And I would be if the media did more to take conservative black men like Uncle Phil or take like Glenn Lowry, I would, or Shelby Steele. I would.
Well, hold on. Remember,
that would help.
Uncle Phil was a disciple of Malcolm X. Just remember.
And Shelby Steele was a black radical. Like my favorite story of his is, in his point, and this is a really good one. He was part of the Black Panther movement or the Black Radical movement. He's 22 years old, flush with pride. He walks up to this guy in a hotel, white guy, and he looks at him straight in the face, gets right up in him, and he goes, "Give me $20 because you're a racist." You know what he did? He gave me 50. And he's like, "You don't even understand the power I felt when he gave me that $50."
Now, hold on.
Like,
that's where media representations can go bad. So, do you know, like,
when white people lost, when white people that were running the show, we both agree that lost all their moral legitimacy when they admitted, yeah, we fucked you over all this time, and they lost it all.
Now, hold on. Now, this is important. When you say white people lost their moral legitimacy, okay, I'm putting a pin in that.
Okay, his final point is what he believes is happening now is that a black priestly class is being elevated to sell moral authority back to white people. You see what I'm saying? That again, these critical race theory is elevated this black priestly class of which Sean King is in, and all these Ta-Nehisi Coates and all these people. It's not helping 90% of black Americans, but then these 10% are getting very rich selling white people's authority back to them. Moral.
So I think for really good criticism of that, you look to the left. So this is what kind of baffles me. You have people on the left, most people, and again, I'm not going to claim to speak for everybody on the left because, again, I'm an idiot. I think most people on the left, probably a majority, would say that Robin DiAngelo's book White Fragility has harmed race relations more than it has helped. And the only reason for that is the title. Right. The impact of that book the impact of that book is the title. It has nothing to do with what's within it. Which to be fair, like, who reads books anymore? What nerds read books?
White Fragility, I didn't know what it was.
Exactly. So the title of the book introduced the term into the popular zeitgeist. You might have heard snippets from it, but very few people who have an opinion on that book have read it. Is that a fair assessment to make?
Yeah, and to be honest, I haven't actually read the whole book on white fragility, but I listened to Carlin Barcinko's podcast when she was reading from it. And the points that she read, I was screaming out loud, oh my God, that's so fucking racist. Like, I would never think that. I mean, I cringed for her in embarrassment, thinking, how could anyone do this? I mean, I would smack a person over the head to think, oh yeah, that tent, oh, person, I didn't expect you to be the principal. Are you kidding me? Like, who says that?
I'm trying to.
And I thought, if this was entitled white, rich, like unworldly, privileged women with a complex.
Well, two things on that. One,
probably
correct. Two things on white fragility specifically. One, I read the entire thing, and obviously I come from a different perspective than you. I thought there were a couple of sections that were cringeworthy. I thought a lot of the language was needlessly combative. And I can see from my perspective, because the book was almost aimed at me, right? Like white liberals who are concerned about racism. I'm not going to.
The audience.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend that I wasn't the audience. There are white liberals who are concerned with racism. A lot of it was concerned to me, because if you say all white people are racist, what white people are going to listen? People who are already concerned about racism and are concerned with fixing it within themselves. So we can see why she did that. But if I removed myself from that lens, there are a lot of decent points there, and I sincerely, I'm going to ask you, all right, I'm shameless self-promotion on my own channel, okay? I put a lot of work into a video called on system justification theory. All right, so you can go to my channel. It's the one called, system justification theory is in the title. I put a lot of work into that, and it got the endorsement. This was like the coolest thing in my tiny YouTube career. I got the endorsement of the author of that theory. That was fucking awesome. Sweet. Yeah, but it's white fragility, but just removed from the moniker of white fragility, and it includes a lot of people.
Okay, so this is where you were coming from, because you kept arguing on Twitter. There is a thing called white fragility, but D'Angelo just keeps missing.
Yeah, because would we be talking about her book if it wasn't called white fragility?
Yeah, but we'd be talking about it in different contexts. I guess to me, like, you're right. Because she hit the concept, and the concept is out there, and it's being used on Twitter and social media. So yeah, you're right. Yeah. That's definitely.
And I definitely think that white fragility, in the way she defines it, exists. And I understand the criticism that if you reject to white fragility as a term, that means you're displaying white fragility. I get that. It's a non-falsifiable theory in a lot of aspects, but I think it can be justified.
Right. Okay. Is there, like, I think for certain, I guess for certain people, there is going to be this certain uncomfortability around race. Yes, I believe she's onto something. I totally, you're right. If it was called something other than white fragility, you're right. I guess then now I don't feel implicated, because it's white fragility. Now I'm implicated in this, and that's why I start to object. So I see what you're saying there. Is this true for some people? Yeah, it is. I just remember thinking, I ain't gonna take advice from a chick.
Well, you see, you see the difficulty.
So many mistakes. It's like, I'm not gonna get a.
You see the difficulties there, though, right?
69 malpractice.
But you see the difficulties in pointing out bigotry. If you make it too broad to encompass too many people, people are going to reject it, because being a bigot is bad. No one wants to be a bigot. In the same way, no one wants to be like wrong. No one wants to be a bigot. They don't want to be implicated in bigotry. So if you make it too broad to encompass too many people, people are going to get defensive, because no one wants to be thought of that way. But if you make it too narrow, as in you make it too easy to apply to other people, then nothing gets fixed, because if no one thinks of themselves as racist, when you talk about racism, who are you fixing? Like, racism is always a problem that someone else needs to fix.
Maybe white fragility, the book White Fragility, is like a Ouija board. Like, it's probably okay to use it once in a while, but if that's your whole life and that's your big deal, that's kind of fucking weird.
Arthur, I'll have you know, I'm using a real microphone instead of the gamer microphones that the Overwatch desk uses. So I object to that.
Oh, like
Actually, I'm a huge fan of the Overwatch League, and the casters. They're all really cool. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's just so you're right. It probably does have a narrow application, and to be honest, if she can get through to some people, because I do think there are some people that have never considered race at all, and that are privileged and so on and so forth. Yes, they should consider this. So if she's writing to that audience and she can get through to them to some extent, okay, good. I hope she gets through the right message, but I'm afraid she's not. But I do think that if you would say she's identified a subset of the population that's uber privileged that doesn't give a shit about race, and this is probably bad. Yeah, well, that's fine. That's legit. But I just think that those people would be way better served listen to Shelby Steele and Thomas Sowell and Larry Elder. Because I just really think what they say, like Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, their conversations on race, like I tune in all the time. I think that those guys are brilliant, and I really like what they have.
Do you think that?
And they disagree a little bit. One's on the left, one's on the right. They agree on some stuff.
All right, so Thomas Sowell, I want to be vulnerable with you for a second, okay? When I hear Thomas Sowell brought up, my bias is because this guy. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm an idiot. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like Thomas Sowell thinks that racism is basically fundamentally over in America, with the exception of like individual instances. Is that fair?
Yeah, we'll start right. He used to be a Marxist, right? So he's come from this. A lot of these people like have made big like changes in their life. But yeah, he says that there's multiple different types of racism, white 2A. So he says that although racism and societal racism like might still happen, like you might get pulled over, whatever, you might show up, at at a conference and somebody thinks you're the driver and not like the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
But he says substantial racism in achieving your goals in life, that has largely gone away.
See, this is my problem here.
Bullshit, but like the major things are okay.
See, this is my problem.
Said, like, you always have a job, you always have a home, but you're going to get called an asshole.
See, this is my problem: is that racism is for racism against black people has this very high bar. It has to be objective. It has to be explicit. It has to be this high bar of like you are being discriminated against because you're black, and identifiably because you're black. Because if a cop treats you rough, if they decide to search your car, how can you prove that's racist? If a cop, yeah, I say if you're a black man and you're pulled over, and this is an anecdote. So this is an anecdote on my part. So I had a black roommate in college, and he was pulled over. For I forget the reason. I apologize. I want to make up a reason. He was pulled over for a reason that makes me look better. Okay, I legitimately forgot why he was pulled over. But the cops decided, hey, I'm going to search your car, and in his trunk they found an AR-15.
Why'd he let him? I wouldn't let a cop look in my trunk unless you got a warrant.
Well, hold on. That's the opposite of don't resist arrest, right?
Well, he can haul me away, but like...
Hold on, that's the opposite of don't resist arrest, right? If you resist arrest, you're at fault. But if you don't resist arrest...
I don't think he can legally look in my trunk without my permission.
Do you think that at that time, so this was in college, and he was like two years younger than me, do you think a 19-year-old kid is going to know all the legal precedents?
May or may not know that. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Like to expect like the general public to know as much legalese as a cop, that's unreasonable. And so like the cop looked in his trunk, and he found I forget what the exact gun, but for all intents and purposes, it was like an AR-15. How about that?
Boy.
All right. Do you think the cop can be concerned?
What happened?
He was questioned and detained.
Probably went fucking berserk.
Yeah, he was questioned and detained for a long time, despite the fact that it was completely legal.
Yeah.
And so,
like this, but this whole weird thing. Why, as a white person, you've never been pulled over the cops? I get pulled over by the cops all the fucking time. All the time. And most of the
what
time,
are you doing?
No reason at all. They they just think I'm out of place. So maybe I look like a black man.
All right. Well, here's an anecdotal.
Over for being out of place.
Here's an anecdotal piece of evidence in the opposite direction. So one time I was driving home without my seatbelt because I was driving home between my place of work and my home, which was literally, I'm not joking, 200 yards away from each other. You might ask, why was I driving home from that? It's because I'm lazy and shut up. Okay?
Yeah,
but
that's solid. I gotta give you props for a 200-yard drive.
Yeah, but somehow I caught the bad luck one day, and a cop saw me driving without my seatbelt. Because it's 200 yards, I'm never going to drive more than 15 miles an hour. Why wear it?
Jesus Christ.
So a cop pulled me over.
You get a ticket for that shit?
Well, I'll finish. So the cop pulled me over, but since it was such a short drive, I had pulled into my parking space at my apartment complex by the time he pulled me over. And again, because it was 200 yards away, I didn't bother to bring my wallet to my place of work because I went there multiple times a day and I didn't want to bring my wallet because I lose things. And so I asked this cop who just pulled me over, fuck, I'm sorry. Can I run into my apartment to get my wallet because I forgot it? I asked a police officer, can I go into my house to get something and come out and show it to you? And he said yes. And what happened was I went in and got my wallet and showed him my driver's license, which is what I was missing. It's hard to say. Now, can I prove that wouldn't have happened if I was black? No, obviously I can't. But is it fair? But would it equally, can I definitively say that he would have allowed me to do that if I was black?
I don't know. I mean, look it up. You would think that seems to be what happens to me. I've had that happen before. I also got pulled over the boat a lot, and you almost never have your wallet on you in the boat. So there's all kinds of weird shit.
Well, hold on. If you get pulled over in a boat, do poor people have boats?
Yeah, like
do they?
Public lights. Yes. So we well, I mean, you can't be poor, but like working class, middle class. So in our lake, we bought this place for $40,000 on a shitty cottage, no AC, blah blah blah, but it's got lakefront access. People would take their boats in there, fish all the time. Like, you know, tons of middle class people. They were like, that's the thing. Fishing is, dude. I was a kick-ass fisherman. I haven't done it in a while, but dude, I was good.
I was good when I was 13.
Bass Pro Tours, but I love that shit.
I was good when I was 13. That's it.
All my childhood. I used to cook. I used to catch dinners for the family. My mom would be like, "Go out and catch dinner," and we would do it. And it would be like perch, crappie, bass. That was fucking awesome. I loved it. I felt like I was like doing something when I was a little kid.
Nice. All right, so.
But like, I don't know. But anyways, this whole like the white privilege thing. It's weird because I was with a group of people and I get this call in the middle of the night, and so like, there was like two guys on a boat with a girl, right? And this girl had never driven a boat. She was just at the lake, and they get pulled over by the cops. The guys start arguing with them. Both of them get hauled off to jail, like in the boat. And then they leave poor Vanessa on the boat. And she's like, I don't know how to drive. I literally don't know how to drive this boat. So she has to like call us to go pick her up. The cops just left her there floating in a pontoon boat. Like, what the fuck? Like, seriously, we were so pissed, you know. And I like their white privilege didn't save them. Like, they just
hold on. What do you think white privilege means?
I don't know. I think that it means that somehow you've got an easier time if you're white. And I just don't know if that's true.
So this is the issue. Like, when white privilege as an aggregate is undeniably statistically true, but when you apply it to the individual, it's hard to make it make sense.
But white privilege, yes, right. So fine, but everybody individualizes things, right? If I say you get a tax break, we're getting a tax break. I want to know what tax break I got or what taxes I have to pay.
Yeah, that's the thing.
You know, I don't really care.
So the best way I have to explain it is I grew up in basically an all-white rural state, or part of a state. where there were almost no black people. All right, introduce a black person into that area, to this poor area that's been destroyed by a lack of jobs. The coal industry destroyed that area. By the way, fuck the coal industry. Coal industry killed my dad. Fuck the coal industry. Hope it dies a horrible death. So people who were white in that area, that was the normality. But if you were black, you were aberrant. And let's say that only 1 out of 10 people were racist against black people. Okay, 0 out of 10 people racist against white people. So since that was a community, you're going to encounter a lot of more racists as a black person than as a white person.
Right. But
same thing as a gay person,
all kinds
right?
Of inter-white fighting due to religion or something like that.
Wait, what?
Like, what if you were a white Catholic in a very waspy area?
There actually was. It's actually a very, very comparable situation, because like in Eastern Kentucky, everybody's Baptist, except for the one family who was Catholic. Very few people knew that girl was Catholic. They might have
faced more discrimination than a black person.
Well, they might have, and again, I know this is an anecdote, but they didn't. They faced no discrimination whatsoever, 0, because Catholic is still Christian.
My grandfather was convinced that he never got a promotion at Libby Owens Ford in Toledo because he was Catholic.
Grandfather.
Everybody else was Protestant.
Grandfather. Okay, so this was. I know I'm old. I'm 30 years old, but this was like when I grew up. And we also had to think that like not all America is not homogenous.
Right,
America.
But this is the time. What I'm saying, the religionism, I don't know what the word is, at the time was so much that my mother couldn't go to some of her friends' weddings because and Catholics weren't allowed to step foot into a Protestant place, but and vice versa.
Even still,
you couldn't even go into the church, man.
I would actually argue that that's less of a form of discrimination, because I felt weird going to. So I didn't grow up around Catholics at all, but my closest friends are the friends that I made in college, and 3 of my closest friends, 3 out of the 4 of my closest friends were Catholic, just because they happened to be in the same place. I didn't feel super comfortable in those Catholic ceremonies. Like they had to no, seriously. They had to like clear with the priest, like, hey, one of my groomsmen is gay and he's not a Catholic at all. Is that okay? Like, they had to clear it with them. Like, so this isn't necessarily discrimination. It's just a religious ceremony, like a wedding. Like, that's a little bit different. I know it's still discrimination, but
story.
Yeah, it's a little bit different, right?
No, it is. But this is all this weirdity, you know? And like, I think that right now, the Catholic versus Protestant is not a big deal anymore. Right. Racism is a bigger deal than the Catholic versus Protestant, no doubt. At the time, like, you know, there was serious, just because, like, in a time where you had serious white privilege, right? This is like in the 1950s. There was still, didn't mean every white person had privilege. So that's why I just feel like it's such a bad lens. It's such low res. Right? Imagine like what are we in 480p or something? It's like 1p. You know, it's hard to use that analogy.
I actually saw some people in the chat, I think, using the analogy. I apologize, chat. I have not been paying much attention to you. But if you use race as a lens to look at things, it doesn't mean that it's the only factor. It doesn't mean it's the only factor for one individual. But if you decide that race is a bad lens to view things, then you stop using race as a lens. And so you lose any sort of like analysis of racism if it still exists in society. The reason why I don't know a ton about critical race theory, all right? For the 5th time, I'm an idiot. But the reason I'm opposed to the opposition to it is because it seems to me that a lot of the opposition to critical race theory is basically just saying, stop looking at race. Racism is over. You don't need to look at it anymore.
No,
and if you do look at it, you're causing division.
Yeah, and anyone that says that, I don't like, because I think we want to examine race, but we just want to use a non-critical theory lens and use a traditional theory lens, like science the shit out of it. Like, this is why I didn't have a problem at all when you showed me, and I've actually asked for that article so I can like look at it like more deeply. and I appreciated that, and appreciated the way you did it, because that's traditional theory. We can agree on that, and we can get somewhere. Now, Bobby Frankenstein again has like made an interesting comment. White privilege is not about the perks you get; it's the obstacles you don't have to face. Do you agree?
Oh, me? Yeah. Yeah, white privilege is about the hardships you don't have to face. Yeah.
It's about the hardships you don't have.
Like you can be poor, you can be any other identity. Like you can have a shit life, but you're not going to have a shit life in the vast majority of circumstances because you are white.
But is it black privilege then that they're never going to get pounded with the thing of white fragility?
To me, those things are laughably comparable. Like again, this goes back to
is it like a one nanometer of privilege?
This to me, this is the comparison between if you experience racism and you're called a racist. Are those two things equivalent? No, they're not. It's fine to laugh at someone who says that.
Really? It might be depending on the circumstance. I disagree. Like some of the times, yes. Like some of the times. But there might be a time where a serious accusation of inaccurate racism that could end your career. Like that could be the biggest deal ever. So absolutely, it could be worse than a lot of racism. So I would challenge that. Again, being called racist on Twitter, something again. I got called. MythCon was running a Nazi training camp. I told Dan Arrow to just go fuck himself. Like I don't care. Like that's ridiculous. That kind of being called a racism, no, that's not as bad as getting called a racial slur. But if it got me fired from my job, yeah, it's a big deal. And especially if it wasn't real.
But here, yeah, it's hard to discern intent, right? Like a lot of people were like saying like, hey, all these Equality Act laws, you can't fire someone for being gay or trans and all that stuff. Like that's, well, how would you prove that? How would you, if you were...
It's hard. It's hard because you're right. You could have a racist that's hiding behind all these other things.
Yeah, well, you could have any bigot, right? Even an anti-white bigot, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to discern all this stuff. It's all due to interpretation. And I don't have the correct answer for that. But I do know that a lot of what critical race theory purports, based on my understanding, is not just looking at abject racism. In fact, that's one of the core tenets, is viewing racism as this perfectly viewable, objectively distinguishable form of bigotry. It has to be big and loud and overt. Viewing racism as only that is a mistake, and I agree with that. That's a shitty, tiny-minded view of racism. And if that's all you view of racism, to me, someone who views only that qualifies as racism is motivated to think that racism has been solved in the United States.
Or they're just not opening their mind enough. It could be that too. So I'm not ready to convict that person. They just could be unaware, and the world right now, like the political atmosphere, it's a fucking cactus. Like, you're just lying on that bed. Like Selna, if I'm pronouncing that right, says like what's considered a traditional analysis method because fields advance all the time and confused when he thinks something becomes a valid lens. Like, I guess for me, like to answer that is through a scientific lens, and this is where I think Justin and I can really like get on board with each other. Is like we like both believe in the scientific method. We both think that you should have hypothesis to testing, conclusion, retesting, and that both of us would come up with our preferred theories, but we'd have a disconfirmation criterion that we could probably come up with to say, okay, if you could show me this, this, and this, then okay, then my theory's out. But critical race theory doesn't have a disconfirmation. It just doesn't. It assumes that the ordinary state of racism, it's always taking place, even if all racists are gone, that the system could still be racist. To me, that's anti-scientific. And is not traditional.
Let's take something that I think we would both agree on. In terms of like how difficult it is, because critical race theory is not a scientific theory, and it doesn't claim to be. So a scientific theory So a scientific theory is not like a hypothesis. It's not a guess. It's a collection. It's an
Even if
interwoven.
we're doing the scientific method, critical theory doesn't even do scientific.
No,
method.
no, that's what I'm saying.
Theory. I'm talking
Hold
about
on.
hypothesis.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like when we say scientific theory, it's a web of facts. It is true. Gravity's the theory. Germ theory is the thing. That's not what we're talking about. All right. So I'm granting you that critical theory is not that, and it doesn't claim to be. It's more along the lens of like film theory is probably the best lens that I know to like be comparable to. So one of the best. The way I understand it, and I fully accept that I might be wrong, is very similar to film theory in terms of like using the critical theory lens and all the subsets of critical theory to look at films is like a way to view a certain thing, whether it be real society or just the legal system or the Transformers movies through a specific lens. So queer theory, feminist theory, critical race theory, all that fun stuff. That's how I view it. And it's just saying like, how does race or gender or sexuality or the lack of sexuality affect how this piece, whether it be a piece of media or the legal system or reality, how does this affect how we view this thing?
Right. So, but if you don't take in account intent, there's a problem. Again, like this is CRT doesn't deal with intent. Bobby Frankenstein is right. It studies patterns and outcomes. But like intent is a huge deal. Like, this is why premeditated murder is way different than vehicular manslaughter.
Well, right? I mean, how different is it when
matters?
Well, how different is it for the person who got murdered? They're still dead, right?
But like, don't you? So you
now, obviously, now hold on. Obviously, you would view the person who committed the thing differently, right? If someone intended to murder your dad versus someone who accidentally murdered your dad, you would view those two people way differently. But what about the result on the other end?
Okay, but remember that the family is going to get a certain amount of justice on the other end, right? And that justice is in the sentence. It could be in whatever money is being paid back. Yeah, sure. You lose that family member, and then that's what can you do about it?
All right, but let's say that.
But intent has to matter.
Intent does matter, and it should matter. But it's not the end all be all. You can be unintentionally racist. You could be not racist at all, and put forth racist outcomes.
Why don't we call it something different? Unintentionally racist, but CRT loves to conflate the two.
Because it seems like
racism.
Because it seems like we're putting the feelings of people who might be racist on par with the people who might be experiencing racism.
Right. And but then they love to say that racism is privilege plus power rather than just discrimination by race, because it can go on all kinds of directions. Larry Elder makes the joke. He's like, so who like he goes, what did white people, what did they vote what the most racist race was? And it's like black people. He goes, what did Mexicans vote who the racist racist was? And this is black people. And he goes, who did black people vote the racist race was? Black people. He tells that joke all the time. So he says like that black people are not only receiving racism but are themselves racist. How does CRT deal with that? And they just kind of say, no, that's prejudice. It's not racism. Come on. That's ridiculous.
Well, there's a certain amount of truth to it. All right, let's take it back from that, just again, so we can find a meeting ground. Do you think that prejudice against straight people is on par in any universe against prejudice against gay people?
It would depend. It would depend on
broadly aggregate, like aggregate.
Again, an aggregate. Fine. You could say yes. Like, do I think? But now I'm doing stereotypes.
How about
yes, in aggregate? In aggregate, I would agree with you. But now I'm making.
How about like
what every individual case might not fit into?
How about who is acceptable to make broad jokes about? Like what groups? Like so, for example. No, like, so seriously, for example, I see a lot of anti-Italian hatred on my Twitter feed, or anti-Canadian hatred, and the jokes come from, it's okay to make fun of those groups because there's no actual hatred behind it. I'm serious, like, based on humor theory, like, it's okay to make fun of Canadians because there's no legitimate, deep-seated hatred of Canadians that it could be connected to, right? So that's why it's okay to make fun of those people. And that's where a lot of jokes comes from. Like you can use racial humor, but like as long as it's perceived that there's no deep-seated hatred of that group, it's fine to make fun of them because there's no deep-seated hatred there. But that's different for minoritized groups. You can't, like, white and black are not interchangeable there because there's no real, in the broad zeitgeist, hatred of white people in the same way that there's hatred of black people.
It's starting to be. No, I would agree. So that's an interesting theory. I mean, yeah, there's probably something to that. And I wouldn't sit there and like tell a bunch of black jokes, especially with like I'm not going to do that.
This me if you want. I am the gatekeeper of art and comedy.
We are starting to get a certain amount of anti-white hatred. I'm not going to sit there and juxtapose it and try to compare and make an argument that one's higher than the other, but we're definitely seeing it. Yeah. And I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And and the thing is, when I see anti-black racism, I call it out. But yet, it's socially acceptable to have anti-white racism. That's my problem with it. Like the fact that it's going to exist, yes, I'm gonna.
Again, well, that goes back to like. It
shouldn't get a pass.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't see the two as interchangeable, and so when you make jokes against white people, with the assumption the reason the joke is funny is because white people don't actually experience any hardship because they're white. I
don't even mean the joke. It's just straight up, you're a fucking white person. You can't opine on this. Come on. That's just racism. Like, oh, says the white man. It's maybe that's a joke sometimes, but a lot of times it's not.
How about this?
It's just, that's weird.
All right. Let's take this. Unfortunately, since we've hit 3 hours, and I've had an enormous amount of fun, I feel like I could talk for another 3 hours, but I respect your time.
You're a cool guy.
All right, so the last,
and I do appreciate, like, it's more fun to talk to people that you actually can disagree because I can learn something from you.
Dude, I'm so fucking bored when I'm in places where like there's like everything is the same. I'm so fucking bored. Like I need spaces with people I disagree with. I know.
Cool.
Probably the last thing I'll say, and then
I think you're actually getting at the truth. That's the other compliment I give. I don't think that you're here to demagogue. I really think that you love the sparring and you like to win and blah blah blah. But I actually think that you're seeking the truth. I don't actually think that you're out for some other bullshit reason.
Cool, awesome. Well, hey, I feel like it's been a good faith conversation, even though like I still disagree with, as evidenced by the fact that I've been arguing with you, right? So to me, good faith conversations are like you aren't trying to obfuscate what you believe, like the
right. Yeah. No, you're being honest, and that's we need more of this because I think that it's just understanding the other perspective, like especially when you told me your thing on gay rights again. I mentioned all the practical things, and you're like, dude, I like the sticker. Like that's interesting. That I can learn something from that, and I think that's why we need to have more crossover stuff to be able to learn something.
So the last thing I think I'll bring up, and then it's up to you. We'll turn it to chat for like questions, including if you're up for it, and you are free to refuse this if people can come into the chat to ask you a question, like come into the Discord.
That's fine.
Okay, so that is an option in the next couple of minutes. If you would like to come in to ask either of one of us a question, join the Discord, and you can join the waiting room, and we can bring you in for a brief period of time. Just understand it will be brief. The expectation is that you will ask a question with a very limited back and forth, and then you're gone. Okay, so just realize that. The last thing I'll ask you is, what is you've had a big issue with the term whiteness. Can you explain why you have an issue with that term?
Because it's fungible. I think that sometimes it's meant to be white people, and other times it meant to be white culture. So I think it's kind of the Mott and Bailey. So most of the time, if you're attacked on using the word, you'll say, "Oh, I just mean white culture. I just mean the culture." But then other times it means white people, and I guess I don't really care about this. It's like if we're in university students or older, but when you're trying to teach whiteness to K through 5 or something, they're not going to understand this. These are people that don't understand that, like, you put 3 sticks farther apart in a line, they'll say, "Oh, there's more sticks in the other line than this one." I mean, they can't do basic conceptual things, they're going to think whiteness is white people.
Well,
So
one, we still allow those kids to go to
dangerous name.
Well, we still allow those kids to go to church, right?
Yeah, like I guess, but I mean, I'd have problems in what churches teach kids too, depending on how nuts it is.
Well, yeah.
So I mean, yeah, you're not going to get an argument from me there. I don't know. I think that I don't like the term. If they change the term to something else, I think I could go with it, because I do think there's something resembling the typical white culture, especially if you split it up between South, Midwest, East, and West.
See, to me, whiteness is a recognition that race is a social construct. It's like, just to me, the term is that explicit realization that white is not a thing that exists in the material world. It is a category that is associated with the top of society that you can join or be removed from at will, depending on what the society deems worthy. Like, if you're half white and half black, what does society view you as? Black.
Yeah.
Obama was not the first mixed race president. He was the first black president, because we have a history of viewing non-white as diagnostic. I think it was like 1/8.
They pushed that, though. They were pushing. The campaign was pushing that this is.
But that didn't come from nowhere, right? And Republicans, it's not like Republicans said that he was white or half white.
It was a great selling point, right? Why wouldn't that be a selling point?
Can you think of anybody who called Obama white?
No.
All right. But most people called him black, despite the fact that he was half black and half white.
Right.
Which
right, he was pushing. The campaign was pushing. Again, if we're going to identify with people how they identify, he identifies as black.
Well, yeah, but again, he's not divorced from society, right? He grew up in the same society we did, but the society that, and again, this doesn't have to.
Mulatto? Like, what are we going to say?
Well, of course, we're not going to say mulatto or the other like words that are not great, but why do we have those words? Like, why do we view race this way? It's because we have a history. And again, people who are born after slavery and after the civil rights movement might not understand why they say the things they do, but these come from, time is linear. And so it's like the one drop rule. I think the rule in slavery was if you were an eighth black, you were black enough to be a slave.
Yeah.
And so it comes from that. It's because because non-whiteness is diagnostic.
I know, and this is a racist construct. I agree. It's total social construct from 1650. In coming out of Europe, like, God, I would like to get past this. I would like to just get rid of these things, like and we can't just like yank them out. But I'd like to take the importance away from them, from the societal thing. We can still look at this stuff where it matters, but again, to medicine, like, creed sometimes does matter. Like, certain Pacific Islanders get what they call moya disease, which is a neurosurgical condition that you see in these patients more often than white. Like, it looks, moya literally means smoke, and you see the CT look a certain way. But that's a genetic mattering thing. But black and white doesn't matter, because the skin color is not determinant of the genetics. Like, there's lineages, but they don't.
Yeah, even in medicine, like black, like the traditional racial categories, these socially constructed ones they're not reliable. Like, identifying as black, it's not reliable enough to be valuable for medical history.
Right.
But the thing is,
lineage is, but not race.
Right. So, and that's great. Like, there's that disconnect between what we would like to be true and what is true. That's I think the biggest problem between like good faith actors on either side is all of us want race not to matter anymore. All of us want that to be not a thing anymore. And the disconnect.
You and I do, but there are others that I think that are bad actors on both sides that do. Some that are using it to stay in what I call the priestly class, and others that are racist.
Well, that's the thing. Like, there's not that neat categorization, because a lot of people say as long as we pretend that race doesn't exist, it won't matter anymore. Like, that's the Morgan Freeman quote, right? Like, the way we fix racism is to pretend that race doesn't exist. Which, I mean, if everybody did that, I guess that would be a thing.
It's a good ideal.
But it's not going to happen, right? It doesn't reflect reality. Like, if you are, so this is another big like criticism, like being colorblind is bad. Well, yeah, being colorblind is bad because if you blind yourself to a problem, you're not going to be able to see it. It's like saying, like, I don't see class. And like, wait a second, how do
But when
you
you
discern
by that is
income
I don't judge
inequality?
by class. Nobody looks at the redheaded wife and doesn't understand she's a redhead. They just don't judge her like, oh my God, you're one of those gingers.
Yeah, but if you're truly colorblind or truly and colorblind now is like redheads. Well, if there was like societal discrimination against redheads, like you're kind of motivated. If you want to believe that a discrimination against redheads isn't a thing, we've moved past it. If you're motivated to believe that, then you're going to be motivated to determine any like hardship this redhead faces as something to do other than her hair color. And it's easy to do that.
Colorblind is a bad word because it's supposed to mean like, you don't judge by, as opposed to you don't see. Because if you don't see, I agree, there's a problem there. It should be you don't judge by. So I think it's just the word is got warts on it, kind of like critical race theory.
Yep.
You're right. Like
it's just like, where did the warts come from? Yeah, but where did the warts come from? Like, how about BLM? Let's think 2015 BLM. Where did the warts come from? They came from a football player kneeling during the national anthem.
Okay, I thought they came out of Ferguson, but I don't have my timeline exactly right.
Yeah, but a lot of it seems like there's a certain contingent of Americans who are going to view any movement for racial equality as negative, as causing division, because they have that white salient that racism is over, and if you're still talking about it, it's because you must be trying to attack white people. It seems to be.
I don't have a lot in common with that group.
Well, that group, and that's great, but that group still exists, and they're a sizable portion. It's a worrying portion. Like, I think about 40% of Trump voters had what was considered a pretty high salience in white identity. Now, that's like 40% of 40% of America, but that's still fucking high, right? That's still like, you're going to meet that person if you go out to the gas station, right? Like, statistically, you're going to meet that person. I wonder
how they define that. Maybe that's an interesting thing for me to ask, because I run into Trump voters all the time. Like, I don't know how to ask the question. Like,
a really good question. What's the question? A really good question. A really good question is one we asked earlier. Are you worried about whites becoming a racial minority? I think that's a good question, because if you truly think that race doesn't matter anymore in society, then you'll answer no. If you say yes to that question, it's because you have an identifying. If you have an identifier with your race,
then I'll follow it up with a why.
I don't think you have to, because any why after that is going to be things that are associated with race, right?
No, because it might be. Well, again, it depends on what they perceived. It was that if they perceived that this is people with a different culture coming to change the culture, as opposed to people that have what they think are American values, but happen.
But again, like, that's none of that matters. If the answer to the question is, are you worried if whites are a minority? If the answer to that is yes, it's because whatever why after that is because you associate those traits with non-white people.
Yeah, but that's a stereotype, not necessarily racist.
But the stereotype there is implicitly negative if you're worried about it, right?
But it may not be negative. Like, again,
well, if you're worried about it, it's negative, right? If it's a bad thing.
But what if they answered yes to that question, right?
If they answer yes, then
right. But are you worried? What if I could assure that European immigration would ensure a white majority, but would change American values? Are you okay with that? Like, they probably say no.
But again, you're adding all these qualifiers. Like, it's all associated with race. You're like qualifying why it's okay. Like, you're like negating things.
Farmers to come to your wedding or something, and somebody be like, well, you don't like pig farmers, and they're like, I'm afraid they smell bad. Like, the stereotype isn't that they hate pig farmers. The stereotype is smell.
But hold on, it's still, you think pig farmers smell bad, so you still have a negative stereotype against pig farmers.
Yeah, but no, you're not. But you don't have anything against pig farmers. You don't want them at your wedding because you want your wedding to smell good.
If you use that line of reasoning, you could reason your way out of any sort of racism. Like, it's not that I don't like black people.
pulling some other stereotype through. Again, this could be a stand-in.
All right, if you say, I don't like dumb people, I don't like violent people, I don't like people with frizzy hair, but it has nothing to do with black people. If you associate all those traits with black people, dude, you don't like black people.
Right. But what I'm again, but this is a question that you're kind of stumping on people, right? Like, yes, if some person is saying all those things unfettered, but it's weird when you ask somebody a question that they don't expect randomly on the street, you don't know what you're going to get. Like, I would agree, you're right. If this guy's just opining all this stuff, yeah, I'm with you.
Well,
but
no.
Again, we've unfairly asked them a question they didn't see coming.
All right, I guess the last thing, because it has been a while. If you associate any racial group of people with these characteristics, and I think you would agree with it if it was going against white people. If someone were to say, well, I think white people are all racist, I think white people all don't like black people, I think white people will always vote in their self-interest against black people, but then if you were to qualify that with, oh, no, this white person doesn't believe any of that, I think you would reasonably say, well, it doesn't, well, if you qualify it, that's great, but they're still racist against white people if they believe that about white people, right?
How are they qualifying it? Or what's the assumption they're pulling in with white?
All right, so how about make it super simple. Critical race theory, all white people are racist. All right? And you ask, and someone who believes in critical race theory says, are all white people racist? Yes.
Okay.
Wait, what about the white people who aren't racist? Well, then, no, they're not racist. Does that absolve them of the first statement?
Well, no, then that's an interesting question. And I would be like, why did you say that? Like, again, there might be there may be you could have somebody that says, I believe all the tenets of the Quran, every single one. And then somebody says, okay, what about that one where it says kill a Jew under every rock or something?
All right.
Like, well, I don't want to do that. See, do you see what?
Yeah, just
so
know.
Actually, if he said, no, I don't hate all white people, I didn't know critical race.
Well, just so you know, under every James Lindsay post and every post you make, I'm gonna add, well, what if they asked this, right? Like when an elementary school says that all white people are racist, like, well, what if they asked what about the white people who aren't racist? Then see, that proves they're not racist. They didn't have to ask the right questions.
Too, like, it's a lot different with kids. But again, these are weird survey questions. I mean, again, when we're talking this and that, none of these rules apply. I feel weird when there's some consent issues I have when I just go up to a random stranger and bust them with a big question like this. So that's why I give them more latitude.
In most scientific surveys, you're not like, you sign up for it. Like it's like you're not just like questioning off the street unless it's explicitly stated in the study.
People. But in my case, I said I'm going to ask random Trump voters.
All right, so
See what I'm saying?
I've had I've had a blast. I could keep going for a long time, but I think it's good if we kick it over to, now I'm a tiny streamer, so when I say kick it over to Q&A, it's probably gonna be like one person, just so you know. Okay.
Cool. Whatever.
All right. So anybody in chat, would you like to you have two options. You can either just type a question in chat, or if you'd like to, you can join our Discord and you can actually jump in the waiting room if you would like a chat like that. It is up to you. I'm gonna switch to full cam so I can look at my Discord, because I'm bad at this. Chat question number 1: are you a gamer? Are you a gamer, Brian? Are you a fellow gamer?
Am I?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I haven't. I guess I don't know if I just talk myself as a gamer. Like I played a shitload of COD 2 back in the day.
Oof.
That was awesome. That's old school. Like,
Modern Warfare 2.
And I don't know. Like so I'm limited.
It hurts me to think. It hurts me to think how long ago Modern Warfare 2 was.
The game we played, these old school games. Clash of Heroes from 2011, which is like this turn-based game that me and Sean play all the time. It has the best playability of any game. So, like, yeah, I played a bunch of dumb old school games.
Okay, so kind of a gamer. Here's a really interesting question that I'm
So
interested
yeah,
in.
I'm not as cool.
That's all right. All right, here's
I
another
don't fully
question
get it.
from Selena that I actually want to know this too. So, do you believe qualitative analysis is useful, or should we only use quantitative analysis?
No, the both are important. And you can there's scientific ways to get at qualitative analysis that aren't like completely subjective. So yeah, like quantitative, you're gonna lose some stuff
Well,
there.
I don't.
I'm not an expert at that, but I have seen people do it.
Well, see, to me, subjective is not antithetical to science. Like, if you boil it down, everything is subjective. If you really boil it down, so
Yeah, but
subjective
like
is not bad.
correct. And case studies and like in the medical literature when you read stuff you've got prospective like randomized controlled double-blind trials, right? But there are also case studies where you just write up a single patient and what you do, but there's ways that you do this in the scientific method. So the case study is less meaningful, but you get a lot more qualitative than you do quantitative there, and they're important to read because sometimes you can see something that you wouldn't
But there are a
otherwise
lot
see.
of assumptions in science that you need to make that are 100% subjective. Like, for example, here's an easy one: is cancer good or bad?
It's bad.
All right, so yeah, that's an easy one because obviously
Yeah.
everyone would agree that cancer is bad, even though there's no objective way to determine that, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, like that's just gonna a malignant cancer is gonna just roll through some people,
I
right?
know
Probably
that
not
that's why
really kill you.
that's why it's very easy. Obviously,
Because
even
we made the value judgment that long life is good.
right, exactly. Like that's
Therefore,
like who cares if there's no objective scientific measurement if cancer is bad? We value
right.
life. We don't have to prove it. How about
And long
something?
life.
How about something more complicated like deafness? Like if there was a cure
Well,
for deafness,
yeah,
if is
well,
that good or bad?
that's good. That's a good thing,
But
right? I
then, but
don't
then you
believe
would say like there's a deaf
genocide against deaf
community
people.
that you say there's a
No,
deaf community. There's this a lot of deaf people say like no, I wouldn't trade this for a hearing
you don't
because
have to. You don't have to. Do you, but to the people that again, I've been in plenty of surgeries where they've done cochlear implants, right? That this is in some like the guy was doing bilateral cochlear implants, which is that's new. Usually those are are unilateral. Um, like the patient reports on these things are amazing, right? And a lot of times too, these people can't you don't get from you know complete deafness to hearing like we can hear now, but you can hear some things, so you would hear rhythm. But that's a big deal to be able to hear rhythm versus this. So I don't think that this is a genocide. Like not everyone could elect. If we force this on people, that would be bad.
see that and that's tough, right? Again, this isn't. I'm not saying there's a good or bad answer here. I'm just saying it's more complicated than like cancer. Like the assumptions that we have to make in science are not just like what are the outcomes. It's like are those outcomes good or not? Oftentimes, like what we deem as good or bad in science is subjective depending on like what we believe. Like you can have data, but there's no moral implication of that data until we apply some sort of qualitative subjective analysis.
But I think yeah, in medicine, like the qualitative analysis is probably like the case study, and yeah, and it's important.
Yeah, but again, so this is just like to introduce the idea that qualitative analysis is like where morality comes from, and like you cannot rely on objective analysis alone. It's impossible. Then you just have numbers. It's like if I were to ask you, is 19 or 37 better?
That's a good question.
Like, yeah, like, what the fuck's the context? Like, well, I gave you the numbers.
37 because you have more money. Like
Well, you don't know what it is. What if
I
it's
know.
37 wasps in your eyes? See? Like, you need some sort of like context to figure out what those numbers mean. All right, chat question. All right, why does my white privilege fade into racial slurs when I disclose my ethnic background? Whiteness seems to be a social construct. The one drop rule seems to be evidence that it's a social construct.
Like that's this is a problem. Like okay, so why does white privilege fade into racial slurs when I disclose my ethnic background? So I don't know what their ethnic background is, but maybe this is somebody who appears white but isn't. Whiteness seems to be a social construct. one drop rolls from the evidence, social construct. Yeah, it's absolutely a social construct. Yeah, 100%. I mean, and it's one I really want to get away from because it like its origins are like 17th century England or Europe, when like science is sort of getting started. They think, this is the Enlightenment's happening, and what it is a justification to take black people to the Americas because the ideal was to enslave the Native Americans, right? They did this, like Columbus did this on his first voyage, or this was underway. There was a set of islands southwest of Spain that he stopped at. And these things were under colonialization, that the native tribes were fighting Spaniards off, but ultimately they conquered them and enslaved them. You enslaved the people that the places you were conquered, but all the Native Americans in the New World died due to like smallpox and all kinds of other infectious diseases. So I think the justification was made, well, okay, well then we'll enslave Africans. So now we need a justification.
So we're in agreement that like the justification worked backwards. They did the thing and then decided why it was okay to do the thing.
Yes. This was a bullshit. This is the biggest bullshit justification in the world, and I would love to get past.
It was like just a justification of a system, like system justification theory. Sorry, I'm plugging my video again.
It's bad, and it's a bad justification too.
So yeah, a lot of times people will, and again, I don't think this is like inherently like diagnostic of a terrible person, but a lot of times if we do something bad, we'll try to work backwards to make ourselves feel better as to why it was actually okay.
Okay, so they're saying I'm white passing. Yeah, so the white privilege fade into racial slurs. See, that's an interesting question. That's she who thirsts. Well done, right? Because how can you have white privilege and then, like disclose enough to pay around, then get, then your white privilege is, I guess, I don't know.
All right, the Smeefly one. You're asking the wrong question. If the implant rate for giving someone hearing, for curing deafness if the rate was a 100%, we didn't change the question. It's a lot of deaf people would say like they value the culture and the experiences they've gotten from being deaf, and to cure that would be to be taking away a vital part of their identity. Like another example, like if you could keep someone from being gay, well, you're not changing that person. You're not taking anything away from them because you're stopping it before it happens. But fuck, that's not a good route to go down, right? You don't want to be like curing things that we deem bad, because who gets to decide what things are bad?
Yeah.
We don't want.
But say it was a cochlear implant, you could turn that off, right? You could a deaf person conceivably like turn that on and off.
I see. That's still. I don't. We should never go down that route. We're doing like genetic engineering, like what's it called? This like I forgot the word.
No, I know, but surgery, like for people that are electing to get a cochlear implant or something like this to hear, I mean, these people want to hear. You wouldn't be doing the surgery.
What if the deaf people say that no, like they wouldn't trade their culture for the ability to hear?
Sure, well then that's fine, but then they're going to have to like deal with the people that want to opt out of that culture, and then however many people stay in.
What about like going the opposite way?
You mean?
Do you think that there would be
someone
like
wants to opt in? Are you allowed?
Someone like say, "Hey, I don't want to be able to see anymore. I want to experience life from that perspective."
Yeah, I mean, I suppose are those people, are the deaf people going to accept you fully? Because this is like there were transracial people didn't accept racial.
All right, here's probably my hottest take. I could be convinced that transracial is a thing if race is a social construct, and you somehow like do enough activities to reliably like have society view you as a different race. Like we already had transracial. It's black people who took skin lightening cream to be perceived as white. That we already had transracial. That's a thing.
Okay, well, even more so, go farther back. What about white people that went native and became Indian?
Well, I think the biggest example is the non-white people who took the skin lightening creams, the hair straighteners, in order to be perceived as white. I think that's the bigger example. It's like if you're perceived as white, I mean, those people will tell you further, more than anything else, that that's what matters. Does not matter what your genetic makeup is. It matters what other people perceive you as.
Actually,
and obviously that's a horrible thing that you have to like pretend to be white in order to gain like the privilege in society. But the fact that it existed So it's not the same thing as being trans. There's like, I know that. Please don't misinterpret me, chat. But like there is, I could be convinced that it's a thing that could be done. Nothing to do with morality, nothing to that, but I could be like convinced.
I feel bad for Rachel. Let's put it that way.
All right. Any last questions? I think. Actually, there's one. Let's see. Fuck. All right. One more question. I'm trying to pick one more question. There's some more that I've missed, and I apologize. All right, here's one for me. All right. Based on what I've told you, so I know I haven't given a very concrete definition of CRT. Again, my concrete definition was just a a lens to look at various societal issues from media and culture and legality and criminal justice and all that stuff, using race as the determinant factor. Right, it's just a way to prioritize that without necessarily making it like the most important thing in an individual person. Are there ways, based on our conversation, in which you would see critical race theory as I have described it to you as useful and not evil?
I mean, I guess I don't necessarily think that everything in critical race theory is evil, right? There are certain points about it that I really, really don't like, but everything that critical theory can do, traditional theory can do, and that would be to answer Selna's question, like how do you square the experiments showing racial biases in hiring practice with CRTs and useful, is that those biases in hiring should be addressed better with traditional theory. And there's other ways at getting at this that I think are going to be more accurate, because like CRT is inherently biased. So I would rather use a more unbiased.
Well, that's true, but that's a good thing. Like being biased is a good thing. They're biased in that racism is bad.
You might mistake something. You might mistake a bias, right? Like, again, if we just looked at this on paper, the Amish could look like there's all this anti-Amish bias when actually they're opting out.
Well, here's right? If we looked at it in an unbiased way, that like some people with black sounding names get discriminated versus people with white sounding names. This is data. Right, there is no moral quandary on this.
Okay, but I'm not sure how relevant like the name thing is. But what a much bigger thing of this relevance is that black achievement in schools needs to be higher. They need to be graduating high school at higher rates. They need to be getting better scores on the SATs and the ACTs, right? Like we gotta address gaps in black achievement.
Yeah, but equality there isn't going to help us. Like equality theory doesn't help, because like what determines what schools you go to?
Bias? You don't think there's a bias in some parts of, and this is going to exist in inner city black community, in certain parts of black culture, but it also certainly exists in Fishtown and in trailer park culture, that like studying and
all that shit's super important.
So we that's what I want.
But hold on, traditional theory doesn't look at that. They look at the numbers.
Oh, it does. It's pedagogy. Pedagogy
is not traditional theory.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
How to teach people, and then you do run experiments, and like, wow, kids responded to this better. Okay, let's keep going with that.
Yeah, but critical race theory isn't divorced from traditional theory.
It sort of is, because critical theory has their conclusions preset that racism is the normal state of affairs.
But hold on, every theory has their conclusions preset. Like, okay, in pedagogy, your conclusions are preset.
This is why you blind things in science. You double blind. Sometimes you triple blind it. You blind the data analysis.
Yeah, but what you've determined as the outcome is not blind. Like if you are biased. Like test scores are what you use to determine whether or not pedagogy is successful. Right? Yeah. Why are test scores the best way? Biased? Hold on. Are test scores the best way to determine whether or not someone has learned something?
Yes.
Horse shit. I know this from a personal experience. You can pass a test because you crammed for it the 3 nights before, and you forget fucking everything within a week.
That doesn't matter. It's the being able to achieve that. It's like that. That's not the point.
Hold on, being able to regurgitate. Hold on, be able to regurgitate information versus being able to analyze information.
you remember all the math problems that you do? No, like it's just the fact that you got them right.
That's the thing though. Like, what are the tests? Like that's even test score.
Tests are not racist.
I'm not saying tests are racist. I'm drawing it back a little bit. Like tests make assumptions. Every test you make, and I know this because I'm a teacher, you are determining what you believe to be the most important things to learn. So you are making a biased judgment towards that, and you can absolutely cheese that test if you're a student.
Okay, but if you want to change the test to test for something else, then fine, but do it. But you don't think that you were like, as a teacher, you guys are talking about pedagogy and what the best way of teaching to do all the time. Well, of course, that's going to be based on evidence and in different theories and blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, you're sciencing it. Like your pedagogy is a science.
But if your outcomes are determined by like test scores, you're missing a lot of like the whys. Like, what if there were like 3 students in your class of 25 that came from a different background and that they weren't interpreting your pedagogy in the way that you were assuming that they were? You might miss that with traditional theory. But you might, if you look at other alternative theories, like, because if all you're looking
traditional theory right now,
hold on, if all you're looking at is outcomes,
you're smart enough to know that. Okay, so you could divide it up by race.
I don't know how I could say objectively that certain cultures have different values. I don't know how I could objectively say that.
Of course they do.
But how could you objectively say that?
Yeah, but what you're saying, if we're just looking at poverty or something as a moniker for it, it's like, okay, well, we have a substantial Hmong population here that's like income wise way lower, but like the culture's very, very different, right? They're not, they could be discriminated against, but they're not rioting. They're not, you don't see this underachievement in schools and so on and so forth.
But but even traditional theory would say that like discrimination is not the end all be all only determinant factor. It's a multifactorial process. Like people commit crime. It's not just because they're poor. All right.
Critical race theory doesn't have any. It will not address like black underachievement based on the fact that some people just don't want to do it because it's not cool.
Hold on. Why do people? Hold on.
Fishtown has the same problem.
That is if that's traditional theory, that's the weakness. Why don't people just not want to do it? That's where people stop. That's where people that's where a lot of conservatives who pretend that they're not racist stop. Why aren't black people achieving? Well, because black people just don't want to do the right things.
Right. Well, those people shouldn't be people that are thinking that narrowly shouldn't be in charge of solving the problem. We agree.
But I mean, except that there are a lot of politicians who say that. And a lot of the major conservative thinkers say that, well, if black people just acted better, things would be fixed.
Listen to Glenn Rollery. He talks about the biggest important thing to him, and I agree, is raising test scores. Got to get black achievement higher. And guess what? We have to do the same thing at Fishtown.
Right.
Fishtown is rapidly declining, and they're going to be in the
here's a big one. Test scores. Can you determine someone's worth based on a number? Do you think that's a good thing? No, it is their worth.
Like IQ. Do you think John Lennon is smarter than Elon Musk? Doesn't matter. They're both they've given different things to the world.
Exactly. So if someone's test scores, if your ACT score, what if you fucking sucked at math? Is math valuable? Is math valuable? The answer to that, there's no universal answer. If you're a social worker, fuck math. Who the fuck cares if you're good at trigonometry?
It's related to your problem solving ability.
But that's a big one. Problem solving ability? No, it's related to your math ability, not your problem solving ability, right? If two people are having an argument, based on who has the ownership of this room on Thursday nights, who are you gonna pick? Someone with a lot of human empathy, or someone who got a really good score on the ACT math quiz?
Yeah, but can I pick both?
No, you gotta pick one.
Oh, but what
would you value the ACT math score in that?
I don't know. I might. It's smarter people I'm telling you, the people that I know that are sometimes the best people are the smart doctors with empathy.
I know.
Amazing.
I'm not trying to generalize anybody.
The smart help.
I'm not trying to generalize anybody. I know people. So most of my
just needed my back rub. That's the empathy person.
There you go.
I'm telling you, the
I know
smart person, but Jangles, it's like you, because you're smart and you have empathy, it'd be even better.
Yeah, but I fucking sucked at math. Holy shit. It was my word. I have forgotten how to do basic math. Okay? I got a 29 in math on my ACT. It was the lowest score that I had, but I have forgotten everything from since then. I don't know how to do basic math now. That includes, like, I learned just enough statistics to pass my, like, master's level course, and even then I've forgotten everything because it just leaked out of my mind. All right, I think if you're okay with it, that's about where we're gonna end it. Are you okay with it?
Yeah.
All right. Well,
that's great. The chat was great. It was fun engaging with all kinds of people. Some funny questions, some good questions. So that was fun. So thanks for the chat for being awesome.
All right. Well, I enjoyed myself immensely. Thank you. I hope the chat enjoyed that a little bit. So I'll upload this as a YouTube video with all the breaks cut out. And I'll title it something cool, okay? Well, thank you, Brian, for...
Hey, it's great talking to you, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me. Again, I had a ton of fun. And, yeah, I'd love to do it again. So
Same, absolutely. I got to do this more. Thanks for teaching me. I have to do this thing where I understand how to click the buttons. Like,
okay, you do need to learn Discord. I'm not gonna be nice to you on that.
I'm quickly losing my gamer card.
Okay, I'm not gonna be nice to you on that. You need to learn Discord, okay?
I know. Be an asshole and force me to learn this.
All right. Well, you have a good rest of your night. Okay.
All right. You too, man.
Take it easy.